Chapter 4125. His attention returned to the auction. He had seen so many auction items in a row, but there was no treasure that made his eyes light up. He was inevitably disappointed with this auction. However, at this moment, looking at the next auction item, Lin Yi's eyes suddenly froze. The next auction item is provided by the Central Chamber of Commerce. It is a high-tech product from the secular world. It is a single-lens reflex camera and a solar charger. The starting price is 20,000 spirit jades. The female auctioneer introduced the item in a seductive voice. Looking at the single-lens reflex camera on the silver plate, everyone's eyes were obviously a little more passionate. As for Lin Yi, he felt like he was struck by lightning at first glance. He was stunned in his seat for a long time. The same question kept repeating in his mind. How'd he bring this up? Normally, if one wanted to use the teleportation array to land on the heavenly island, any high-tech and sophisticated item would be destroyed by the powerful pressure of nature. This was a problem that no one could avoid. The reason why Lin Yi could bring a mobile phone up was because of the jade space. No one else had such a heaven-defying cheating method. It couldn't be that there were other jade spaces in this world, right? However, the others present were not as shocked as Lin Yi. Recently, there was a wave of technology craze on Middle Island. High-tech products from the secular world were simply popular on the entire island. Each of them could be sold at a sky-high price, but they were still highly sought after and in short supply. Central Chamber of Commerce. Lin Yi's heart quivered. Why is it this Chamber of Commerce again? Previously, Si Haixiao suddenly became the North Island shopkeeper of the Central Chamber of Commerce. Now, this Central Chamber of Commerce actually magically obtained high-tech products from the secular world. Why does it feel a little strange? Young hero Lin, haven't you heard of it? This is a recently rising Chamber of Commerce. No one can find out who its backer is, but it suddenly sprouted like bamboo shoots after rain. According to our calculations, its current scale should be close to our 5 Elements Chamber of Commerce's. Kai Zhongyang explained to him when he saw the scene on the side. So exaggerated? Isn't that a little scary? Lin Yi couldn't help but be surprised when he heard that. 5 Elements Commerce had a strong backing like the Pill Hall. It had been the undisputed #1 Chamber of Commerce for so many years. If it was another super Chamber of Commerce with a deep foundation, such as the Hong Chamber of Commerce, trying to catch up, it would be more understandable. However, this Central Chamber of Commerce was a new Chamber of Commerce that had suddenly risen. It's not just you, young hero Lin. All of us in the industry are more shocked than you. But no matter how unbelievable it is, they still did it. Perhaps it won't be long before this Central Chamber of Commerce takes over the leading position and becomes a legend in the business world. Kai Zhongyang sighed with a sigh. While the two of them were talking, the surrounding people were shouting out bids one after another. In just a short while, the price had already reached the height of 50,000 spirit jades. Everyone was far from giving up. This is too exaggerated. Lin Yi couldn't help but be speechless. In the secular world, this is something that can be found everywhere. It's not rare, and it's not worth much at all, but it can actually be sold for such a sky-high price here. My Tiandan Pavilion's daily sales can't even compare to a digital camera. What kind of world is this? The rarer something is, the greater its value. This is an unchanging truth. Although this thing was common in the secular world, it was a rare treasure on the heavenly island. It might even be the only one that could be found in a scorpion's poop. It's not strange at all that it can be sold for such a sky-high price. Kai Zhongyang sighed. Be that as it may, but in the eyes of a common world person like me, this is still too ridiculous. Back in the common world, even the lowest level, trashy elixir was worth at least 1,000 times more than a DSLR camera, but now it's the other way around. It's unbelievable. Lin Yi smiled bitterly, still feeling like it was unreal. You're right. You're right. You're right. You're right. Incredible is right. The emergence of this Central Chamber of Commerce itself is incredible. It almost relied on its own strength to set off a technological craze in the entire Central Island, and it has a tendency to sweep through the other 4 islands. Everything here is a huge profit. Every time it is sold, it will snowball faster and faster, and it will become bigger and bigger. It's simply unstoppable. Kai Zhongyang shook his head helplessly. This sudden rise of the Central Chamber of Commerce was so mysterious and powerful that it had now become a target that all the Chamber of Commerce forces must take seriously. Perhaps if they were not careful, it was not impossible for them to be swallowed by it in the future. Since this Central Chamber of Commerce can sell these technological products from the secular world, doesn't that mean that it has a way to travel between the secular world and Heavenly Island? Lin Yi's eyes suddenly lit up. If the Central Chamber of Commerce only sold 1 or 2 items, it might be possible that its behind-the-scenes owner brought it all at once through some special means, nothing more. However, it was now focusing on technological products. If it wanted to supply such a large-scale product, it was impossible to bring it all at once. It must have its own unique supply method. With the conditions of Heavenly Island, it was simply unrealistic to want to produce it here. The goods could only come from the secular world. In other words, the people of this Central Chamber of Commerce must be able to freely travel between the secular world and Heavenly Island. If not, there must be a way to travel between the two worlds. Otherwise, it would be impossible to explain all of this. This guess was absolutely reasonable. Moreover, Lin Yi had long been wondering how his cheap master Zhang Liju, whom he had yet to meet, had returned to the secular world back then. That damn thing had turned into such a cowardly state after a trip back. Yet his cheap master had returned with no problems at all. Now that the doubts of the Central Chamber of Commerce were confirmed, it was enough to prove that returning to the secular world from Heavenly Island wasn't completely impossible. It was very possible. Thinking of this, Lin Yi couldn't help but feel a burning passion in his heart. After being on Heavenly Island for so long, he would be lying to himself if he said that he didn't miss his friends and brothers in the secular world at all. If there was a way to go back and see them, it would be a huge wish of his. Of course, guesses were just guesses. Lin Yi also knew that with his current identity, it was simply impossible for him to go to the Central Chamber of Commerce to ask about this. In fact, it wasn't just him. Even if the top bosses of the 5 Elements Commerce and the Hong Chamber of Commerce came forward, they wouldn't even bother with them. Probably, but no one knows what exactly is going on. We don't even know who the behind-the-scenes owner of this Central Chamber of Commerce is, so it's even more impossible to find out about these core secrets. Kai Zhongyang smiled and said. Chapter 41-26. Core secret. They rely on this to continue to develop and grow. This is their way of making money. It is indeed impossible to disclose. Lin Yi nodded. That's right. One thing we can be sure of is that they must have some special channels to get these things from the secular world. However, they will never reveal even half a word about it. Just like our 5 Elements Chamber of Commerce, there are some special and rare medicinal herbs that can't be found in the outside world. It's also very difficult to find them in the deep mountains, but only we can artificially cultivate them. This is our secret. The Chamber of Commerce relies on this to maintain its core competitiveness. In the end, this SLR camera was sold for a sky-high price of 68,000 spirit jades, and the next few auction items, all provided by the Central Chamber of Commerce, were also technological products from the secular world. Walkie-talkies, surveillance cameras, foot bathtubs, even all kinds of canned food from the secular world appeared. Although they were not as practical as a group of technological products, because of their rarity, they were also sold at a high price, which shocked Lin Yi and made him secretly envious. Casually making some common things from the secular world, almost without any cost, could sell them at such an amazing price on Heaven Stage Island. Was there a more profitable business than this in the world? What was exorbitant profit? This was the real exorbitant profit, shocking the world. Lin Yi felt that alchemy was already enough to make exorbitant profits of spirit jades, but compared with the Central Chamber of Commerce, it was simply incomparable. If he could figure out the secret of the Central Chamber of Commerce traveling between Heaven Stage Island and the secular world, with Lin Yi's means and the assistance of an artifact like the space of a jade pendant, even if there was only one person doing this business, it would definitely not be much worse than the Central Chamber of Commerce. Of course, this could only be a casual thought at the moment. The key was the secret. He could only wait for the opportunity to slowly dig it out. However, no matter how good the Central Chamber of Commerce was at keeping their secrets. But there was no such thing as an impenetrable wall. He believed that one day he'd be able to grasp this secret, and then he'd be able to return to the common world. Starting from the SLR camera, there were a total of 10 items, all of which were technological products from the Central Chamber of Commerce, each of which was sold at a staggering price, detonating the first peak of this Middle Island Auction Festival. For a moment, the name of the Central Chamber of Commerce was firmly engraved in the hearts of everyone present. Even those who had never bought anything from it would definitely have a deep impression of it and would not easily forget it. However, the name of another shop immediately entered everyone's line of sight. Moreover, it had only used a few pills in total, yet had almost achieved the same effect as the Central Chamber of Commerce. Its name was Heavenly Dan Pavilion. Let's move on to the next item. The Tiandan Pavilion, which had recently opened in the Zhongdao market, came from an unknown small business, but the auction items it offered were not simple at all. I don't think I need to go into detail about the effects of a top-grade gold core. The starting price is 30,000 spirit jades, the female auctioneer said with a smile. Before his voice died away, everyone's breathing suddenly became heavy. A gold core was extremely rare, not to mention a gold core of the highest quality. To any golden core stage expert, it was simply a fatal temptation, and they would not hesitate to go bankrupt for it. Gold core, as the name suggested, was the same as the Foundation Establishment pill. After taking it, one could break through a level, but the difference between it and the latter was that it was effective for golden core stage experts. The rarity of a gold core was not only because this kind of fifth-grade pill was difficult to refine, but also because its refining materials were extremely difficult to find. One of the most important and core materials was the 10,000 crossing Golden Dan fruit. Lenny had 3 10,000 crossing Golden Dan fruit, but it was a fruit after all, and it was not convenient to store it for a long time. After a long time, it was easy to lose its medicinal properties, so Lin used it to refine it into a gold core. 3 myriad crossing Golden Dan fruits and 5 golden cores were made. This was the biggest harvest he'd gotten in the past while he'd been concocting. Young Hero Lin, a supreme-grade golden core. This is an unprecedented amount of wealth. Kai Zhongyang, who was at the side, knew for the first time that Lin actually took this thing out for auction, and he could not help but exclaim. One must know that this gold core, even in the 5 elements commerce, was a good thing that could be used as a last resort, let alone a gold core of the highest quality that could only be found by chance. I can't bear to part with it. But in order to promote the reputation of Tiandan Pavilion, I was forced to go all out. You can't catch the wolf if you don't sacrifice the child. Lin replied with a bitter smile. This was the truth. Seeing that he was getting closer and closer to breaking through to the gold core, no one would want to auction off their gold core. In the eyes of any normal person, that was simply stupid. However, if a gold core of the highest quality could be exchanged for a meteoric rise in Tiandan Pavilion, then it would not be a loss. This time, Lenny really put in a lot of effort. 40,000 spiritual jades. From the beginning, this competition for a gold core of the highest quality could only fall into the hands of the big shots in Area A. Everyone in the other areas could only be envious because they did not have the capital to do so. 50,000 spiritual jades, 70,000 spiritual jades, 90,000 spiritual jades. The previous auction items, even the technological products taken out by the Central Chamber of Commerce, only increased by a few thousand spiritual jades. Now that it was the gold core of the highest quality, it increased by 20,000 spiritual jades, which made people's blood boil when they heard it. In the blink of an eye, the bidding broke through the 100,000 spiritual jades threshold with an unstoppable momentum, and it was still rising crazily. No one found it strange, because it was a matter of course. Even if it was a gold core of the lowest quality, it would cost at least 30,000 spiritual jades in the 5 elements commerce, and a slightly better one would cost 50,000 spiritual jades, or even more. And this gold core of the highest quality, if it fell into the hands of a talented gold core expert, could directly break through 1.5 levels. The success rate was far higher than that of ordinary quality. If one could get 100,000 spiritual jades, it would be a blessing. Unfortunately, this was the auction event of Middle Island, and everyone in area A was from a rich family. If they really wanted it, 100,000 spiritual jades was just the starting price for them. For such a good thing that everyone coveted, Wei Shinjin, who was in the early stage of the gold core realm, was naturally drooling. Unfortunately, his capital could not be compared to the other young masters of sex with rich backgrounds. When he saw that the bidding price had exceeded 100,000 spiritual jades, he could only give up. No matter how much he thought, he did not have enough spiritual jades, so he could only admit defeat. In the end, this gold core of the highest quality, at the sky-high price of 170,000 spiritual jades, was bought by a young man in Pavilion A. Chapter 41:27. Lin Yi glanced at him. This young man's background was probably so deep that it could not be any more. 170,000 spiritual jades, but he didn't even bat an eyelid from beginning to end. It could be said that he regarded spiritual jades as dirt. This calmness could not be faked. As for the others, although they regretfully missed the opportunity to obtain a peak grade golden core, and there was only one in the entire auction, they still remembered the name of the Heavenly Pill Pavilion. All of them secretly hoped that they would be lucky. They were thinking that they had to quickly find time to go to this unknown little shop to take a look. Although it was not famous, since this Heavenly Dam Pavilion was able to make a peak grade gold core, then maybe there was a second one. Who could say for sure? After that, Lin Yi also put out 3 best Jindan bottleneck breaking elixirs. Like the Jindan, they were also of the 5th grade, but the price was much lower than that of the best Jindan. The final transaction price of the 3 Supreme Grade Golden Core Bottleneck Breaking Pills was only 130,000 Spirit Jades, and this was all thanks to the Supreme Grade Golden Core, which had whetted everyone's appetite. Otherwise, the price would have been even lower. However, the Heavenly Elixir Pavilion had already achieved a great victory in this auction. Not only did the 4 elixirs sold for a sky-high price of 300,000 Spirit Jades, Lin earned a huge sum of money. More importantly, the name Heavenly Elixir Pavilion had already been firmly engraved in everyone's heart, just like the name of the Merchant Association in the Central Island. From now on, the name of Heavenly Elixir Pavilion had spread throughout the entire island. As for the medicine sect, Tong Yangsui and Jiao Huanshan, who had been thinking of suppressing Tiandan Pavilion before, at this time, they didn't even mention it. From the moment the best Jindan was put out, they had been shocked speechless. They knew that all the preparations they had made before were stupid and futile. Looking at this situation, in the eyes of the people present, this newly opened small Tiandan Pavilion was probably much more attractive than their old medicine sect, which made them depressed to the point of collapse. However, they were helpless and could only look at each other in dismay. First, there was the strong rise of the Central Chamber of Commerce, and then there was the unknown Tiandan Pavilion. Today's auction in Zhongdao had become a special event for these two. All the other auction items before and after the auction did not create as much of a sensation as these two, nor did they leave a deep impression on people like these two. The auction continued in an orderly manner, although rare treasures continued to appear. However, it was not as eye-catching as before. However, when it was nearing the end, the Central Chamber of Commerce once again released a piece of heavy news. The next auction item is provided by the Central Chamber of Commerce. It's very special. It's not a heavenly material or earthly treasure. It's not a divine weapon or medicinal pill, and it's not a rare treasure either. It's just a letter. The female auctioneer paused on purpose. As expected, the crowd burst into an uproar when they heard the words Central Chamber of Commerce. Their eyes lit up. They didn't expect it to be a letter. What kind of treasure was this? Unexpectedly, the female auctioneer's next words shocked them. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid I'll have to pay a visit to you. Do you have any relatives in the secular world? Were there any descendants? Do you have friends? If you do you want to contact them but have no way? Hearing this, Lin Yi's eyelids suddenly twitched. Thinking of the secret that the Central Chamber of Commerce could travel to and from the secular world, he had already guessed the meaning of this letter. This letter provided by the Central Chamber of Commerce can give you this opportunity. This is not a regular auction. As long as you have a fixed price of 100,000 spirit jades, you can get a chance to communicate with the secular world by letter. Don't think that this is a scam because this is a two-way service. As long as your letter is delivered to the secular world, the Central Chamber of Commerce will bring you a reply, so it's not a scam. The female auctioneer attracted everyone's attention. For a moment, the atmosphere in the hall became a little strange. The letter delivery service provided by the Central Chamber of Commerce was meaningless to most of the people present because they had nothing to do with the secular world. Naturally, there was no need for them to write a letter. However, for some special groups of people, this was an unexpected opportunity bestowed by the heavens. Some still had families and friends in the secular world. Some were even like Lin E., cultivators who came from the secular world. Suddenly hearing this service, it would be a lie to say that they weren't excited. However, just to write a letter, they had to pay a sky-high price of 100,000 spirit jades. This price was really unbearable. If 100,000 spirit jades could be used to bid for some rare treasure, then it could be of help to one's strength. But this letter, other than relieving homesickness, what else could it be used for? Could it be used to survive? Or could it be used to improve one's strength? Wasting 100,000 spiritual jades just to get someone to deliver a letter. This kind of thing was definitely a scam. There were not many people who had such a strong capital. In the eyes of most people, only a fool with water in his head would do such a stupid thing that made people speechless. However, after a moment of silence, there was finally someone who took the bait. "Count me in." Lin E hesitated for a moment and was the first to speak. This time, he had earned 300,000 spirit jades from auctioning the elixirs. Although 100,000 spirit jades was ridiculously expensive, he could still afford it. To be honest, in the past 6 months on the Heaven Level Island, Lin Yi's concern for the secular world grew stronger day by day. Almost every day, he would think about the current situation over there. Was everything going smoothly, or did something unexpected happen? It was just that he had no way of contacting them, so he could only suppress this worry and longing in his heart. But now, suddenly, the Central Chamber of Commerce suddenly fell from the sky and provided this kind of letter delivery service. For Lin, it was like sending charcoal in snowy weather. Even if he knew that there might be risks, he couldn't help but want to give it a try. It was only 100,000 spirit jades. He could afford to gamble. Everyone's eyes suddenly focused on Pavilion A12 again. There was mockery and suspicion, and there was a lot of discussion. What is this kid's background? At this moment, Wei Shinjin had the same question in his heart as everyone else. Although he had already made up his mind to find a chance to get rid of this troublesome kid, Lin Yi's behavior still made him unable to help but feel nervous. Sitting together with Kai Zhongyang, he could conveniently take out 100,000 spirit jades, and he also had a connection with the secular world. These three halos superimposed together made Lin Yi's identity even more mysterious and unpredictable, causing people to have wild and fanciful thoughts. After Lin Yi took the lead, there were a few people in the hall who immediately bid for this service. 3 of them came from Area A, and 1 from Area B. They should all be people with deep backgrounds. It was unknown whether they were cultivators from the secular world like Lin Yi, or whether they had relatives in the secular world. Chapter 4128. After bidding for this service, the receptionist immediately sent each of them a stack of fine paper. The quality was excellent, and it was engraved with the seal of the Central Chamber of Commerce. This was specially prepared for them as a letter. Lin didn't say anything and immediately bent over the table to write, describing his experiences in the past half a year on Sky Class Island, all kinds of things big and small. He especially emphasized that he had found Sydney and Tian Chan, telling them not to worry. As for the recipients of this letter, there was a long list of names. Not only were there Song Ling Shan, Sun Jingyi, and other close female friends, but also his lackeys. Lin Yi believed that no matter which one of them received this letter, it would be seen by everyone and circulated among each other. After writing, Lin Yi immediately stuffed the letter into an exquisite envelope and stamped it with a wax seal. Only then did he hand it over to the receptionist beside him, asking him to send it to the Central Chamber of Commerce. At this time, the auction of Middle Island had just ended, and it was time to leave. Young hero Lin, you'd better come with me, or you can meet up with Elder Sky and the others. It's best not to act alone at this time, just in case. Kai Zhongyang gave Lin Yi a look and pointed to the A-15 pavilion on the other side. At this moment, Wei Shinjin's sinister gaze just happened to look over. No need, Elder Kai, you go back first. I can take care of this small matter myself. Lin Yi smiled faintly and shook his head. He knew that this time, Wei Shinjin would definitely take revenge on him. After all, he was an early-stage Golden Core Master. Not only was he taking revenge for Sydney, but even if it was just for the sake of eliminating hidden dangers, he had to find a way to eliminate this threat as soon as possible. If he went back with Kai Zhongyang or the Will of Heaven today, then no matter how bold Wei Shinjin was, he wouldn't dare to make a move against him in front of these two. He would definitely choose to endure and look for opportunities to take revenge in the future. This was not a good thing for Lin Yi. Rather than giving the initiative to his opponent, he might as well show a flaw and lure the snake out of its hole. Lin Yi believed that if Wei Shinjin found out that he was alone, that guy would definitely not be able to hold back. As long as he was prepared in advance, this would be the best opportunity to counterattack. Very well, you need to be careful. No matter what, that fellow is a core disciple of Snow Sword faction. Do not force yourself. Do you understand? Kai Zhongyang saw that Lin Yi was so insistent, so he could only warn him. Don't worry, Elder Kai. I know what I'm doing. Lin Yi nodded. After descending from the Wan Tian Peak, Lin Yi immediately parted ways with Kai Zhongyang. Wei Shinjin, who was trailing far behind, saw this and his eyes lit up. He had been worried that Lin Yi would leave with Kai Zhongyang. He did not expect the opportunity to come so soon. Qian'er, you go back first. I have something to do. Wei Shinjin immediately turned his head and instructed Situ Qian, who was leaning against him. Brother Wei, I'll be waiting for your good news. I'll be waiting for your good news. Don't let that annoying fellow get away. Situ Qian naturally knew what Wei Shinjin wanted to do. She immediately nodded in agreement. She was very confident in Wei Shinjin's strength. She was very confident in his strength. Wei Shinjin responded and immediately tailed Lin Yi. He was far behind the crowd. His tracking ability was much better than an ordinary person's. If one did not pay attention, it would be very difficult to discover him. Unfortunately, Lin Yi's perception had long since locked onto him. No matter how he pretended, Lin Yi could see through him. He was just like a clown. Yet, he still thought that he was concealing his tracks and thinking that he was very clever. After the time it took to burn a stick of incense, there were fewer and fewer people around. They had left the core area of Middle Island. Wei Shinjin began to gradually shorten the distance and was ready to attack Lin Yi. He did not know who Lin Yi was, nor did he know where Lin Yi lived. But at least he knew that if he wanted to kill Lin Yi to vent his anger, today's opportunity must not be wasted. Once he missed it, he might not have such an opportunity in the future. Seeing that there weren't many people around, and seeing that Lin Yi had turned into a secluded alley, Wei Shinjin couldn't help but feel happy. This was a heaven-sent opportunity, and he hurriedly chased after Lin Yi, gathering his chi and preparing to attack. However, as soon as he turned the corner and saw the empty alley in front of him, Wei Shinjin was stunned. What the hell? Where did that guy go? Why is he gone? At this moment, a figure suddenly appeared above his head and flew towards Wei Shinjin. Wei Shinjin was shocked, especially when he saw the person's face. He was even more shocked. This guy who suddenly appeared was the martial man who took Sydney away and injured him. Ling Yi. Good. There's a way to heaven, but you don't want to take it. There's no door to hell, but you want to barge in. Let's see how you die this time. Wei Shinjin was surprised and happy. He did not have the time to think about why Lin Yi suddenly disappeared, and this martial man Ling Yi suddenly appeared here. He only had one thought at this moment, and that was to kill this martial man Ling Yi and take revenge for the failure last time. As a core disciple of the Snow Sword faction, there was no doubt that Wei Shinjin's strength was strong. His reaction was not slow either. Almost in an instant, all the genuine qi in his body surged out, and the silver sword on his back was immediately unsheathed. The temperature within 1,000 feet suddenly dropped a lot, and there seemed to be snowflakes falling faintly. This was the sign of the Snow Sword faction's core martial technique. Once it was used, the surroundings would definitely be accompanied by snow. This time, Wei Shinjin had learned his lesson of underestimating his opponent. As long as he used his true strength, he did not believe that he could not kill this martial man Ling Yi. However, as soon as the snow-colored sword light flashed, it was mercilessly suppressed by a powerful genuine qi that descended from the sky. Strictly speaking, this wasn't a stream of pure qi, but a bomb, a terrifying killing move that combined pure qi bomb and pellet fire bomb. Lin Yi had been gathering it since he came out of the auction house, waiting for this moment. Boom! In an instant, the earth quaked and the mountains swayed. Even with Middle Island's super high-grade protective array, everything within a radius of several miles was directly leveled to the ground without any suspense. Even the surrounding passers-by, who were affected by this sudden change in expression. In this Middle Island, although golden core stage experts were not rare, such a strong aftershock was not something that ordinary people could create. The dust gradually settled, and seeing the passers-by experts quickly surround him, Lin Yi glanced at Wei Shinjin, who was blown to the point where it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. He found a convenient position for himself to escape, but he did not immediately turn around and escape. Chapter 41-29. This was because Situ Qian definitely knew that Wei Shinjin had chased after him for revenge. At that time, she would definitely think that he was the one who killed Wei Shinjin. What Lin Yi needed to do now was to ensure one thing. It didn't matter if Wei Shinjin was dead or not. Today's incident had to be blamed on Wu Fu Ling Yi, and it had nothing to do with him. After deliberately stopping for a moment to let the passerby experts who heard the news see his face clearly, Lin Yi then turned around and disappeared from everyone's sight. That person looks familiar. Where have I seen him before? Sure enough, a passerby expert said doubtfully, isn't that Snow Sword faction's Wei Shinjin? I remember now. A while ago, Snow Sword faction put a man and a woman on the wanted list. That person just now seems to be the man. I think his name is Ling 1 or Ling 2. Someone quickly reacted. Don't worry about that. Just inform Snow Sword faction about this. I heard that this guy is quite a show-off. He has always been popular with women. Who would have thought that he would end up like this? He might even lose his life. How miserable. A passerby expert immediately sent a message to Snow Sword faction. Wei Shinjin was attacked by Wu Fu Ling Yi. No one knew if he was dead or alive. This explosive news instantly shook the entire Snow Sword faction. This was different from Sydney's elopement. Not only did it affect the faction's reputation, but it might also cause the death of a promising core disciple. For any faction, this was a huge matter. Looking at Wei Shinjin's mangled body, Situ Qian almost cried until she fainted on the spot. If it wasn't for the fact that a few passerby experts insisted that Wei Shinjin was the culprit, she would have directly informed the higher-ups of the sect and asked them to go to the Five Elements Chamber of Commerce to force Kai Zhongyang to hand over the culprit. Once again, the Snow Sword faction mobilized all their forces and issued a bounty for Wu Fu Ling Yi. And this time, they directly offered a bounty of 10,000 spirit jades. A few days later, Wei Shinjin was rescued by the Snow Sword School and finally returned from the gates of hell. However, this news did not cheer up the entire Snow Sword School. Even Wei Shinjin himself became completely disheartened after learning of the situation and fainted. Aside from the internal and external injuries in his eyes, all the meridians in his body had been shattered. He, Wei Shinjin, the core disciple of Snow Sword faction who had received much attention, had now become a cripple. Geniuses had been reduced to dust, and they could not even compare to ordinary people. All of this, however, had nothing to do with Lin Yi. The Snowsword sect had been in an uproar because of Wei Shinjin's matter, but from start to finish, the blame had been placed on Wu Fu Lingyi, who didn't exist. It didn't affect him at all. What Lin Yi needed to do now was to refine some 4th and 5th tier medicinal pills in addition to cultivating every day. Then, he would take a stroll around Tian'an Pavilion. It was a peaceful and comfortable life that he had never had before. After the auction, there was an endless stream of customers who came because of the auction. In the past few days, Tian'an Pavilion's business could be said to be unprecedentedly booming. The daily sales were already close to the first day's opening. If this continued, the business would only get better and better. It was completely on the right track, and everyone who saw it felt happy. However, while Lin Yi and the others were overjoyed, the Will of Heaven had a worried expression on his face for the past few days. In fact, he had no choice but to find Lin Yi to drink. "Big brother Tian, what's bothering you?" Lin Yi drank a few cups with the Will of Heaven before asking. In his eyes, the Will of Heaven had always been a person with a strong mind. Even with his meridians shattered, he had been able to persist for so many years. Ordinary matters should not have been able to make him so depressed. "Hey, brother Lin Yi, I have indeed been depressed for the past 2 days. The fickleness of human nature is the fickleness of the world. Favors are truly unreliable. In the end, I can only rely on myself," said the Will of Heaven with a wry smile. "Brother Tian, tell me what happened?" asked Lin Yi. "A few days ago, I thought I would be able to see a few old friends in the Middle Island auction. In the end, not a single one of them appeared. So, the day after I returned, I went to the Island Lord Pavilion at the summit of Middle Cauldron Mountain. I wanted to see my old friends and restore my position as Vice Island Lord. In any case, my injuries are no longer a problem. It is just a matter of time," said the Will of Heaven as he drank. "And then? Did something happen?" Lin Yi vaguely guessed what had happened. I thought it would be a matter of course. I didn't expect the Island Lord to reject my request with the excuse of my absence in the Island Lord Pavilion all these years. He said he wanted to hold a meeting to discuss it. What disappointed me the most was the attitude of my old friends who were Vice Island Lords. None of them were willing to stand up for me. It really made me feel disappointed and speechless. To think that I had always thought that they were my loyal friends," the Will of Heaven said indignantly. After listening, Lin Yi did not look surprised. No matter how powerful they could not escape the word snobbish. This is actually not incomprehensible. From their standpoint, no matter which one of them, I'm afraid they would not want you, a Vice Island Lord, to come out and fight for power with them. "What do you think, Brother Tian?" Lin Yi analyzed for him. "Yeah, it's not that I don't understand that." Chapter 41:30. He believed that as long as he had enough time, the Will of Heaven was confident that he'd be able to return to his peak, but if that happened, he'd have to keep his tail between his legs for now. "Is there anything you can do? Like a pill or something that can help you get over this hurdle?" Lin Yi asked. "If Zhang Liju, that old bastard, was here, I could ask him to help me with the pill. With my knowledge, I'd be able to get it done in one go, but now..." The Will of Heaven scratched his head helplessly. "Condensed soul pill? What level is that?" Lin Yi asked. Ever since he'd successfully made the extremely difficult 5th level elixir, his confidence in making elixirs had increased by leaps and bounds. Even if he'd never heard of it before, he was confident enough to give it a try. Level 6, and it's not a normal level 6, but one that's extremely difficult to make. From what I know, Zhang Liju is the only one who has the confidence to make a level 6 condensed soul pill, even in the entire hall. Xiao Ho and Xiao Kai are all masters, but they don't have that level of skill. The Will of Heaven sighed. 6th level. Lin Yi hesitated. With his current strength, he could only make a 5th level elixir at most. That was his limit, but he still said, "Maybe I'll give it a try." "Lin Yi, lil bro, you can't force yourself to do this. If something goes wrong, the consequences will be unthinkable. I'm happy that you're willing to try. Don't force yourself." The Will of Heaven quickly tried to dissuade him. If his level wasn't high enough, and he forced himself to make a high-level pill, he'd be lucky to make a useless one. If he wasn't careful, it could lead to a tragedy like a cauldron exploding. That'd be a joke. It's fine, I wanted to try too. See if I have the ability to make a level 6 pill. Lin Yi smiled. He didn't wait for Tianqing to continue and immediately left to find Kai Zhongyang to ask for a 6th level elixir recipe, as well as the corresponding ingredients. This was not the golden core of the nascent soul. Instead, it was the simplest entry-level 6th grade pill, the 6th grade solidifying nascent pill, which was specially used to stabilize the nascent soul realm. Its medicinal properties were gentle, and the difficulty of refining it was the lowest among all the 6th grade pills. When everything was ready, Lin Yi immediately began to try. The divine armament cauldron analyzed the alchemy curve as usual. However, when it came to the step of inputting true qi, no matter how hard Lin Yi tried, the godly pesticide cauldron was indifferent, and the same sentence was displayed on the tablet. Big brother Lin Yi, your cultivation level isn't high enough, resulting in insufficient qi. Jing can't concoct pills for you. As expected, Lin Yi shook his head helplessly and sighed. He had already expected this result. Not having enough strength would lead to insufficient strength of true qi. At the moment, this was an unsolvable problem. If this most basic threshold could not be crossed, even if the divine armament cauldron was a divine tool for alchemy, it would be useless. The only way was to wait until his strength was raised to the gold core stage before he could try again. It seems that I have to find a way to improve my strength as soon as possible. I believe that if I can break through to the gold core stage, I should be able to try to concoct pills. Lin Yi explained to the will of heaven. Although the refining of the gathering nascent soul golden pill was extremely difficult, Lin Yi had confidence in the godly pesticide cauldron. Of course, this was the premise that his strength could meet the minimum threshold of refining a 6th grade medicinal pill. Oh, brother Lin Yi, your current strength is still at the peak of the foundation establishment late stage. There is still a long way to go before you reach the gold core stage. However, you are a person who cultivates the creation battle art. You can't use the eyes of ordinary people to look at you. If the preparation work is in place, it is not impossible. The will of heaven said thoughtfully. Crossing 2 levels to reach the gold core stage? Is this possible? Lin Yi's eyes lit up. For most people, the difficulty of breaking through to the foundation establishment great perfection was not small, let alone breaking through to the gold core stage. Even for those experts in the foundation establishment great perfection, there were very few who could have the confidence to break through to the gold core stage. As for the peak of the foundation establishment late stage, wanting to achieve it in one step was simply a fool's dream. Of course, there is nothing impossible in the world. Your brother, I, directly crossed 2 levels from the peak of the foundation establishment late stage and finally succeeded in breaking through to the gold core stage. I believe that with your talent, brother Lin Yi, it should be possible, but the premise is that you need to make enough preparations. The will of heaven nodded. What preparation? Lin Yi's heart moved and asked quickly. In addition to adjusting your body's condition to its peak, the main thing is to prepare the corresponding medicinal pills. It would be best if you also need some other auxiliary tools to help you level up. After all, it is not that easy to rise 2 levels in a row. Brother Lin Yi, you should have prepared for this, right? The will of heaven asked. I currently have the foundation establishment barrier breaking pill, the foundation establishment pill, and the gold core golden core. As for other auxiliary tools, I have a star ink stone. Lin Yi admitted without reservation. You have a star ink stone? The will of heaven was startled when he heard this. Then his eyes lit up. This is a legendary treasure that can be used to perfectly break through to the gold core stage. That is great. With this thing, your chances of success will be much higher. Really? Lin Yi was instantly overjoyed. He did not expect that the will of heaven would actually know about the star ink stone. Although with his current strength at the peak of the foundation establishment late stage, he could already match most of the gold core stage experts. When he met a truly strong enemy, it was still not enough. Just like the gold core middle stage expert that he met at the Hoot Sai Tian Wu Mountain. If Lin Yi did not use a trick, he would not even be able to escape from that expert. He could only wait for death. Therefore, if there really was a way to quickly break through to the gold core stage, Lin Yi would definitely be more than happy to do so. Of course it is true. In fact, as long as the quality is good enough, just the gold core, golden core, and the foundation establishment pill alone will give you a little hope of breaking through to the gold core stage. However, the hope is rather slim. If you add the legendary star inkstone, your chances of success will be much higher. The chances of forcefully breaking through will be at least 50%. The will of heaven said with a face full of confidence. 50% or more? That is enough for me to take a gamble. When Lin Yi heard this, he could not help but be excited. A 50% chance of success was not low at all. Moreover, his usual style was not to play it safe. When it was time to go all out, he would go all out. At this time, he would not hesitate at all. Chapter 41:31. Brother Heaven, you can't just look at the bad side of things. You have to look at the good side, right? With a 50% chance, I won't be so miserable, right? Lin Yi smiled confidently. If you can succeed, that would be for the best. With the help of a rare treasure like the star inkstone, and with your potential, Brother Lin Yi, I dare to bet that you will become the strongest golden core expert. Within the same level, no one will be able to compete with you. The will of heaven's eyes shone, but he was still worried. But brother, you have to understand that although your medical skills are superb, doctors can't cure themselves. If you fail and your meridians are shattered, I'm afraid no one will be able to save you. Although the will of heaven urgently wanted to recover his strength and urgently needed the golden core, he did not want Lin Yi to take the risk and try to break through for him. After all, this was not a joke. If he failed, the consequences would be unthinkable. At that time, no matter how guilty he felt, it would all be for naught. Brother Heaven, cultivation has always been against the heavens. Wealth comes from danger. Since there is a 50% chance, I have to try no matter what. Lin Yi thought for a moment and said with a determined gaze. Although Lin Yi was afraid of the miserable fate of his meridians being shattered, he was actually not too worried. After all, the creation battle art he cultivated was not the same as the original version of the will of heaven. His previous breakthrough process was not as dangerous as the will of heaven said. Even if he failed, his meridians might not be shattered. Moreover, even if his meridians were shattered and his chi was gone, he still had junior brother Zhu, so self-repair was not a big deal. Not to mention, he still had a 50% chance this time. If he was still hesitating and didn't even have this little bit of courage, then he couldn't have extravagant hopes of advancing a step further in the future. It would be better to quickly think of a way to hide in the mortal world and live a peaceful life. Since brother is so determined, then I won't say anything more. Today, let's have a good chat about your brother's breakthrough experience. Oh, right? And how to use the star inkstone. Qinxing nodded. He himself was a man of spirit back in the day, and the fact that Lin Yi could make such a manly decision was something he admired in his bones. Thank you, big brother Tian. Lin Yi humbly accepted the teachings. Breaking through to the Jindan stage was a completely unknown field, especially a breakthrough of a higher level. The difficulty could be imagined. Now, there was a rare opportunity to learn from a legendary master like the Will of Heaven, which was definitely more valuable and effective than any kind of rare elixir. Chatting with the Will of Heaven for a whole night, Lin Yi could be said to have benefited a lot. What the Will of Heaven taught him was not only the method to reach the Jidan stage, but also many precious experiences. With the current strength of the Will of Heaven, when he talked about how to break through to the Gold Core realm, it was already a condescending perspective. Compared to his own fumbling in the past, what he taught Lin Yi now not only had a higher chance of success, but also could dig out unprecedented potential. After adjusting his physical state to the peak, Lin Yi immediately decided to start a closed-door training to break through. As for the Tiandan Pavilion, he had refined and stored a lot of elixir these days, which was enough to support him for a while. He believed that Tian-chan and Sydney could handle it. However, after Lin Yi went into closed-door training, he did not directly try to break through according to the method taught by the will of heaven. Instead, he was going to find the ghost to confirm it first. After all, this was also a super master, and it was ready-made. It would be a waste not to ask. Senior, I believe you have heard what Big Brother Tian said before. I wonder if there's anything else that I need your advice on? Lin Yi asked. Hee, the will of heaven is one of the few masters in Middle Island. With his personal guidance to break through to the Gold Core realm, how can there be any mistakes? He is a human being, and I am a spiritual beast. Of course, he has the most right to speak on this kind of thing. What's more, he is cultivating the creation battle art. I have not even come into contact with this aspect, so I can't intervene at all. The ghost laughed. Then, I will start preparing for the breakthrough now. Lin Yi nodded and said in a low voice, Wait, I can't say anything about the creation battle art. However, what he said about how to use the Star Inkstone is not complete. If you do as he said, although it is not impossible, you will definitely not be able to bring out the full effect of the Star Inkstone. The ghost suddenly interrupted. Oh, Lin Yi was slightly stunned. Previously, the will of heaven told him that the Star Inkstone contained the power of meteorites and stars. As long as he absorbed it during the breakthrough process, the gold core that he condensed after success would be far more stable and tenacious than other gold core experts. Regardless of attack or defense, he would naturally be much stronger than experts of the same level. Actually, you can't blame Tianxing for being incomplete. After all, the rarity of Star Inkstone is incomparably high. As a human cultivator, for him to know so much about it is already quite rare. However, according to the method he spoke of, he would at most be able to unlock half of its effects. It can't be considered a perfect breakthrough, Gue Dongshi said. Then what is a perfect breakthrough? Lin Yi hurriedly asked. Of course, you have to develop all the power of the Star Inkstone. Only then can it be considered a perfect breakthrough. Although the Star Inkstone is a meteorite from outer space, it is a combination of the meteorite from outer space and the vast ocean. Not only does it contain the power of the stars, but it also contains the power of the ocean. The ghost explained. The power of the ocean? Lin Yi was stunned. He could not help but say, the power of the stars can make the gold core more stable and tenacious. But what is the use of the power of the ocean? The so-called ocean, when it is quiet, can contain all things. When it is moving, it can cause huge waves to rise to the sky. Therefore, the power of the ocean can give your gold core more variables and more possibilities. More importantly, it can make your divine sense far more pure and powerful than experts of the same level. The ghost paused, then changed the topic. If the power of the stars is said to increase the hard strength of your gold core, then the power of the ocean is said to increase the soft strength of your gold core. Having both soft and hard strength is the perfect breakthrough. I see. Then how can I absorb the power of the ocean? Is it like absorbing the power of the stars, using true qi to condense it? Lin Yi asked. Of course not. The power of the ocean is not as hard as the power of the stars. You can't use true qi to grasp it. You have to specially use divine sense to gather it. The ghost taught. In the area of primordial spirit, it was an expert at grandmaster level. Only then did Lin Yi see the light. Immediately, under the ghost's guidance, he began to cultivate in seclusion to break through to the gold core stage. Middle Island Cultivators College. On Middle Island, other than the various major sects and forces, there was another force with an extremely high status, and that was the Cultivators College. Looking at the whole of Middle Island, the Cultivators College was undoubtedly the school of the highest level. Almost all the core disciples of the major sects would come here when they were in the gold core stage. R1152. Chapter 41-32. Here, not only would they be personally guided by the famous Chancellor, but if they could graduate here, they would even have the chance to be sent to East Island for further study. Once they finished their studies and returned to their sects or families, they would definitely become a popular candidate for the next core figure. That was the truth. At least 7 out of 10 of the top big shots in Zhongdao had the qualifications to study in East Island. So if they had the chance to go to East Island, it meant that they would have a meteoric rise. That was an excellent opportunity that all the cultivators yearned for. Recently, the Cultivator College welcomed an exciting event, and that was their senior chancellor, Nantion Aurora, who had recently broken through the nascent soul-perfected realm and became one of the few profound ascension stage masters of Middle Island. An expert of the mysterious ascending stage was already standing at the top of the heavenly island. Otherwise, Tian Xing, who was only at the peak of the nascent soul stage, would not have been allowed to sit on the position of the deputy island master of the Middle Island. Of course, the will of heaven had the ability to kill people above his level and couldn't be measured with common sense. But this was enough to show how precious, profound ascension stage masters were. The appeal and influence of any profound ascension stage master was definitely not to be underestimated. And in recent years, as the status of the Cultivator College in Middle Island continued to rise, their right to speak also continued to expand. The voice of choosing the college representative to become the Vice Island Master of Middle Island had also risen recently. And coincidentally, due to the absence of the will of heaven for many years, the position of Vice Island Master became vacant, providing the Cultivator College with the best opportunity to enter the top power circle of Middle Island. Originally, the Dean was the most ideal representative. Regardless of strength or position, he definitely deserved to be the Vice Island Master of Middle Island. However, this person was the same as alchemy god Zhang Liju. He was always elusive. He was neither suitable nor interested in the position of Vice Island Master of Middle Island. Except for him. Looking at the entire Cultivator College, there were only 2 people left who were qualified. One was the Executive Vice Dean Lang Xiufeng, and the other was Nantion Aurora, who had just broken through to the Profound Ascension stage and was appointed as the Vice Dean. Among the rest, although there were Profound Ascension stage masters, to represent the Cultivator College and become the Vice Island Master of Middle Island, they needed unparalleled influence and connections. It wasn't just about strength. As for Lang Xiufeng and Nantion Aurora, the 2 people who had the most support, although the former was stronger, Nantion Aurora was not as strong as Nantion Aurora. However, he was a genuine martial arts fanatic. His tactics and tactics were blank, and he was far from being as good at studying as Southern Sky Aurora. If nothing unexpected happened, Southern Sky Aurora, this newly advanced Profound Ascension expert, would have a higher chance of winning. In a secret chamber of the Cultivator Academy's core residence, 2 people were sitting opposite each other, exchanging toasts. They talked cheerfully and humorously. These 2 people could be considered familiar to Lin Yi. One was Nantion Aurora Polaris, the Chancellor Nantion, who had once descended to the secular world. It was Si Hai Xiao, who had just been appointed as the Central Chamber of Commerce's North Island shopkeeper. Congratulations, old friend Nantion. This time, not only did your strength increase by a level, you also became the Vice Dean as you wished. What a double blessing. Come, let me toast first. Si Hai Xiao toasted with a face full of joy. Haha, shopkeeper Si, you're too polite. This time, if it wasn't for your Central Chamber of Commerce providing me with millions of spirit jades to buy the votes of these academies, even if I could become the Vice Dean, it definitely wouldn't be so fast, and it definitely wouldn't be so smooth. So this toast should be me toasting you to express my gratitude. Nantion Aurora Polaris laughed proudly, clinked his cup with Si Hai Xiao's, and immediately downed it. Old friend Nantion, your words are too serious. The friendship between us is mutually beneficial. There's no need to thank me. Just because you're treating me like an outsider, I have to punish you with a toast. Si Hai Xiao pretended to be unhappy. All right. I accept the punishment. Nantion Aurora Polaris smiled as he punished him with a toast. That's right. Back when I was still in the Hong Chamber of Commerce, old friend Nantion, in order to help me become the shopkeeper of the North Island branch, you specially pulled people over to purchase a large number of orders from the Hong Chamber of Commerce. I remember all these favors in my heart. I won't forget them for the rest of my life. Si Hai Shao patted his chest and said, Hee hee, we've been old friends for so many years. Just now, you said that I was treating you like an outsider. Now it's your turn. You have to drink as a punishment too. Nantion Aurora Polaris immediately laughed. I admit it. Si Hai Shao laughed heartily and immediately said, Now that I'm the shopkeeper of the North Island branch of the Central Chamber of Commerce, I have as many spirit jades as I want. Furthermore, I have a lot of autonomy. It's not a problem for me to transfer as much as I want. So, I have to repay you well. This time, old friend Nantion, my backer, has spoken. Our Central Chamber of Commerce will definitely do our best to help you in the competition for the Vice Island head of Middle Island. That's great. Nantion Aurora Polaris was instantly overjoyed. Although the Central Chamber of Commerce was a newly established Chamber of Commerce, its power was even greater than that of the #1 Chamber of Commerce like the Five Elements Commerce. He had personally witnessed all this. Being able to obtain the full support of the Central Chamber of Commerce, Nantion Aurora Polaris was confident that he would win the competition for the position of Vice Island Head of Middle Island. I believe that with the power of our Central Chamber of Commerce, in addition to old friend Nantion's ability, your position as the Vice Island Head of Middle Island is already guaranteed. Come, let's celebrate in advance. Cheers! Si Hai Shao vowed solemnly. All right, cheers! Nantion Aurora Polaris was elated when he heard that. He had been looking forward to this position for many years. It was just that he had never dared to think too much about it. Now, unexpectedly, his dream was about to come true. However, there's something I have to tell you in advance, old friend Nantion. If you successfully get the position this time, you have to pay a visit to our backer with me. Is there any problem with that? Si Hai Shao suddenly said. No problem. Absolutely no problem. In the future, your Central Chamber of Commerce and I will be on the same boat. This is something that should be done, Nantion Aurora Polaris promised. That's good. I was still afraid that old friend Nantion wouldn't be willing, Si Hai Shao said with a smile. He was well aware of his backer's methods. If Nantion Aurora Polaris really went to meet him, they would really be on the same boat in the future. No one would be able to escape. However, Nantion Aurora was still completely unaware of this. Given his intelligence, although he was not completely defenseless against this mysterious and unfathomable Central Chamber of Commerce, he had been blinded by greed. Right now, he was completely immersed in the excitement of attaining the position of Deputy Island Lord of Middle Island. This was a glorious position that countless cultivators dreamed of. The position of Vice Island Head of Middle Island had a quota, and it had long been filled. There was no extra position. Chapter 41:33. Over the years, it had never changed. Even though there had always been a high number of people who wanted to enter the Cultivation Academy, it had never come true. Therefore, even if Southern Aurora Polaris succeeded in breaking through to the Profound Ascension stage, it was just wishful thinking. There was absolutely no chance of winning. However, there was always an accident. The will of Heaven's injury had not recovered, and he had been absent for a long time, causing his position as the Deputy Island Master to waver. Not only did it give everyone an excuse, but it also gave Southern Aurora Polaris a glimmer of hope to replace him. After running around, coupled with the strong backing of the Central Chamber of Commerce, Southern Aurora Polaris was determined to win the position of Deputy Island Master of Middle Island. While Southern Aurora Polaris and Si Hai Shao were plotting for the position of Deputy Island Master of Middle Island, on the other side of the Tianan Pavilion, Lin Yi was busy making a breakthrough in seclusion. As long as Lin Yi could successfully break through to the Golden Core stage, he was confident that he could help the will of Heaven refine the Golden Nascent Gathering Pill. As long as the will of Heaven's strength could quickly recover in a short period of time, then with his domineering strength that could instantly kill a Profound Ascension stage expert, no one could covet the position of Deputy Island Master under him. In the face of absolute strength, all conspiracies and schemes were just a joke. Of course, the premise of all this was that Lin Yi could successfully form his Golden Core. The difficulty and risk of breaking through from the peak of the late stage of foundation establishment to the golden core stage was not something an ordinary person could bear. In the early stage of seclusion, Lin Yi could be considered to have a smooth journey. After adjusting his state to the peak, the first thing he did was to take the supreme grade foundation building pills, and he took 3 at once. In a short period of time, the strength of the true qi in Lin Yi's body increased by a level, instantly breaking through the peak of the late stage of foundation establishment and approaching the great perfection of foundation establishment. In the foundation establishment realm, every peak was an extremely difficult threshold. It was the same from the peak of the early stage to the middle stage, from the peak of the middle stage to the late stage, and from the peak of the late stage to the great perfection. It was the same. Fortunately, Lin Yi had a lot of supreme-grade foundation-building pills on hand. The exquisite heart-devouring grass was rare in the North Island, but it was very common in the Middle Island. Kai Zhongyang helped Lin Yi get some. Coupled with his innate talent and foundation, this threshold that countless people had been stuck at for decades, or even their entire lives, was easily broken by him. If he stopped now, Lin Yi would truly be a foundation establishment perfected expert. However, for Lin Yi, who was determined to break through to the golden core stage, this was only the most basic preparation stage. It wasn't even an appetizer. Then, without waiting for the surging genuine qi in his body to stabilize, Lin Yi immediately began the second step, which was also the most important step of this breakthrough, consuming the supreme grade gold core. This was the method taught to him by the will of heaven. As the saying goes, go all out in one go. Borrowing the momentum of breaking through the foundation-building great circle, while the true qi in his body was at its peak, he would break through to the gold core stage in one go. The reason why the will of heaven suggested that Lin Yi try to break through to the Jindan stage was because of the golden core realm. This was the reason. Although this seemed to be far more risky and difficult than following the prescribed order, but in fact for the truly talented geniuses, it was impossible for them to do so. Not only would the success rate not be lower, but it would also be higher. Having just reached the foundation-building great circle, the genuine qi that had just erupted in his body was still unstable. It was still the most active and also the most vigorous time. At this time, the possibility of breaking through the barrier in one go was far higher than following the prescribed order. Because once the genuine qi in the body was completely stabilized, when the spirit was lost, although it was easier to control, it would also lose the momentum. At that time, the foundation-building great circle would be completely stabilized. Not only would the genuine qi in the body no longer be a help to break through to the golden core realm, but it would also become a real obstacle to the breakthrough because of the inertia of being content with the status quo. Although the theory of the will of heaven's leapfrogging breakthrough, Lin Yi felt that it was inconceivable at first, but after thinking about it carefully, it seemed to make sense. As long as the foundation was deep enough and the talent potential was strong enough, it seemed that it was indeed easier to break through in one go than to follow the prescribed order. The so-called geniuses did not take the usual path. This was probably the truth. Of course, if there was no theoretical basis and directly walked blindly, and thus met with rebuff or even blood, then it was not a genius, but a complete idiot. As soon as he took the golden core, Lin Yi's eyes suddenly widened. At this moment, the genuine qi in the meridians of his body had suddenly more than doubled, and it was still increasing. In an instant, a terrible pressure was produced, and at the same time, it violently impacted the meridians of his body, and at the same time, wreaked havoc everywhere. At this moment, Lin Yi felt like he was a balloon filled with air, and until now, he was still inflating and could explode at any time. This was not an illusion, but a real instinctive warning from the depths of his body after encountering extreme danger. Although the golden core, and the foundation establishment elixir were of the same origin. One was a 5th grade elixir, and the other was a 4th grade elixir. The difference between the two was too great, especially for experts of the foundational level. The difference between the two was like heaven and earth. They were both supreme-grade elixirs. The Foundation Establishment elixir might be able to increase the strength of the genuine chi in their bodies by 20%, but the Golden Core could increase the strength of the genuine chi in their bodies by 2 times, or even more. An increase of 20% was an improvement that could be controlled, but an increase of 3 times was too exaggerated. If it was not handled properly, it could really kill someone. In particular, the creation battle art that Lin Yi cultivated was an extremely ferocious mental cultivation method. The impact and lethality of his genuine chi was far more ferocious than that of ordinary people. In addition, he was breaking through to a higher level, and his genuine chi was already extremely sharp. At this time, it was naturally even more fatal. Breaking through to the Golden Core was very likely to encounter the crisis of shattering meridians. The phrase, "the will of heaven," was not as simple as it seemed. Moreover, this was the creation battle art that Lin Yi had modified using the art of dragon mastery. If it was the original version that was even less stable, it would be unimaginable. No wonder even a legendary figure like the Will of Heaven had lingering fears about it, and even suffered a setback when he was breaking through to the nascent soul realm. It was not an injustice at all. Braving the risk of the meridians in his body about to explode, the veins on Lin Yi's forehead bulged. Relying on his strong willpower and control, he began to channel the powerful genuine chi in his meridians into his dantian. According to what the Will of Heaven said before, the dantian was the place to form the core. To form the core, one must first channel the powerful genuine chi throughout the meridians in the body into the dantian. This was the most dangerous step in the whole process of breaking through, and it was also the most crucial step with no shortcuts. If he could withstand it, then he could start the next step of forming the core. If he could not, then most of his meridians would be shattered, and in a more exaggerated case, his body might even explode and die. Chapter 4134. His forehead was sweating profusely, and his eyes were bloodshot. Lin Yi gritted his teeth and persevered. Taking a step forward might not be heaven, but if he took a step back, it would definitely be hell. In this state, not only could his meridians explode at any time, but he was also only a step away from chi deviation. This lasted for half an hour. With inhuman perseverance, Lin Yi channeled the terrifying vital energy in his body that had skyrocketed because of the gold core into his dantian bit by bit. In the eyes of ordinary people, this short half an hour gave Lin Yi the feeling that it was as long as half a century. Fortunately, he finally endured it. However, this was far from the time to relax. Until now, everything he had done before was just preparatory work. After channeling all the vital energy into his dantian, the next step was to condense the gold core. The biggest difference between the so-called gold core stage and the foundation establishment stage was that the gold core was condensed in the dantian. This gold core would become the source of all the vital energy in the body. It was the symbol of a qualitative change from a foundation establishment stage expert to a gold core stage expert. At the same time, it was also the life of all gold core stage experts. The process of condensing the gold core could be said to be extremely difficult, but it could also be said to be easy. This was because there were not many techniques involved. It was to continuously condense and compress the huge amount of vital energy that had been channeled into the dantian until it finally condensed into a solidified vital energy crystal. This was the gold core. Generally speaking, if one could successfully endure the most dangerous step of channeling vital energy, then very few people would fail the step of condensing the gold core. However, even if everyone condensed the gold core, the gap between them was like heaven and earth, and this step directly determined their future strength and potential. Some gold core stage experts' gold cores were not solid and were called void cores. Their strength was among all gold core stage experts, and they were naturally the weakest. There were other gold core stage experts whose gold cores were as hard as stone and were called solid cores. Their strength was among all gold core stage experts, and they were naturally first-rate experts. Even if everyone practiced the same martial arts technique, the power of a solid core stage expert was far stronger than that of a void core stage expert. The root cause of all this was the quality of the gold core that was condensed. Therefore, although the step of condensing the golden core was not as dangerous as before, it was a crucial step that no one dared to take lightly. If they were to slack off or be careless at this time, they would not be able to make up for it later. Any ambitious expert would not hope to condense a void core. Only by condensing a solid core would they be able to advance further and become one of the strongest experts. However, at this moment, what Lin Yi wanted to do was different from the others. What he wanted to condense was not a solid core, but a $10,000 core. An ordinary solid core expert's gold core was as hard as a rock. However, the 10,000 gold core that Lin Yi was about to condense was of a higher level. It was as hard as meteoric iron, and all of this required the assistance of the star inkstone. Only by absorbing the power of the stars and the power of the sea in the process of condensing a golden core could a true 10,000 gold core be condensed. This was a perfect breakthrough. Only then could one become the strongest gold core expert, while slowly controlling the majestic vital energy in his dantian and slowly condensing it. Lin Yi had a multitask. He used a portion of his vital energy to capture the power of the stars and the star inkstone and guide it into his dantian. At the same time, he had to control his divine sense to gather the power of the sea and guide it into his dantian. Multitasking was extremely difficult for anyone. If there was even the slightest mistake in the process, it would result in failure. If it was light, he would not be able to condense the $10,000 core. If it was heavy, he would fail to form his core. His strength might even regress, and he would never be able to break through again. However, at this moment, Lin Yi's performance did not seem to be forced at all. Instead, it was methodical and rather steady. In addition to Lin Yi's own talent, there was also the contribution of the ghost. Foundation establishment experts generally did not know how to use their divine sense. The most difficult part of multitasking was using their divine sense to gather the power of the sea. If there was no guidance from a primordial spirit expert like him, Lin Yi would not have been able to do it so easily. At this point, condensing the golden core was the final and crucial step. Lin Yi had thought that this breakthrough would be smooth sailing until he successfully condensed the $10,000 core and achieved a perfect breakthrough. However, in the next moment, he realized that he had been too naive. Condensing the golden core in his dantian was not a problem. Using his divine sense to gather the power of the sea was the most difficult step, but it was also not a problem. What surprised Lin Yi the most was that the seemingly simple step of grabbing the power of the stars had a fatal accident. In the instant that the power of the stars was drawn into his meridians, a huge hole suddenly appeared in his meridians. It had actually directly split open. The incomparable pain and the shock of being caught off guard almost caused Lin Yi's body to completely lose control. The vital energy that had been condensed in his dantian flowed into his meridians. It looked like he was about to go mad and cause a tragedy. Fortunately, Lin Yi reacted at the last moment and forced his vital energy back. At the same time, he used his mental cultivation method to repair the split meridians. However, for the moment, he did not dare to continue grabbing the power of the stars from the star inkstone. The special characteristic of the power of the stars was that it was extremely fierce and sharp. The reason his meridians had split open just now was because they were unable to endure its sharpness. This was not something that could be endured just by gritting his teeth. If this continued, Lin Yi believed that before he could condense the myriad gold core, the meridians in his body would have been completely crippled by the power of the stars. Amidst the lingering fear, Lin Yi could not help but feel a trace of joy. Fortunately, he had drawn in the power of the stars through his meridians. At least, he still had the chance to heal himself. If he had poured the power into his dantian without hesitation, then what would have split open wouldn't have been his meridians, but his Dantian. Once the Dantian was crippled, there wouldn't even be a chance to save himself. He would directly be reduced to a complete cripple. However, even if this sort of tragedy hadn't occurred, Lenny still did not know what to do for the time being. Although that damn thing had taught him how to use the Starring Stone, he had not personally used it after all. It was impossible for him to understand these details. At present, there were only two choices left for Lenny. The first was to give up on the Star Inkstone and condense his gold core according to the rules. This was the safest method, but the price was that he would be unable to achieve a perfect breakthrough. As for the last choice, it was to brace himself and continue grabbing the power of the stars. However, the final result was extremely likely to be failure in condensing his gold core, and he would become a cripple. He gritted his teeth and pondered for a moment. He was absolutely unwilling to choose the first choice, but choosing the second was too dangerous. If he could not think of an effective solution, then he would simply be courting death. Chapter 41:35. Suddenly, an idea flashed in Lin Yi's mind. Although the power of the stars was as sharp as a weapon, and it was definitely impossible to directly guide it into the body, it was not completely impossible. In the end, the reason why the power of the stars would hurt the meridians was that it was impossible to completely control it by simply relying on the true qi. However, what if it was refined outside the body and then guided into the body? This idea seemed like a fantasy to outsiders, but it was not impossible for Lin Yi to do it, because he was an alchemist. As long as the fire was well controlled, it was entirely possible for Lin Yi to refine the power of the stars outside the body and then absorb it into the meridians of the body. Thinking of this, Lin Yi took out his alchemy skills and refined the power of the stars outside the body bit by bit. With this test, it was really a success. Time passed bit by bit. From the time Lin Yi began his closed-door training, it had been a full 3 days and 3 nights. The will of heaven, Tian-chan, Sydney, and the others nervously waited outside the door. After Ho Guanqi and Kai Zhongyang heard the news, they also came every morning and night to inquire about Lin Yi, for fear that something would happen to him. After all, it was not easy to break through to the gold core stage, and it was even more dangerous to do so. Any accidents could happen. For a closed-door training to break through to the gold core stage, 3 days was definitely not a long time. However, watching the time pass, the will of heaven inevitably felt a little uneasy. After all, the longer it took, the more difficult the process was, and the higher the possibility of an accident would happen. In the final analysis, Lin Yi decided to break through in advance in order to help him refine the gathering nascent soul golden pill. If he really fell into the fate of qi deviation, the will of heaven would have to live in guilt for the rest of his life. After asking someone to buy 2 jars of wine, the will of heaven simply set up a table outside the door and drank while waiting. However, just as he poured a cup, Lin Yi's voice came from behind. "Big brother heaven, you're in such a good mood. Why don't you drink with me?" "Lil bro Lin Yi, you succeeded?" The will of heaven turned to look at Lin Yi, who seemed to have been reborn and became a completely different person. He was pleasantly surprised. "It's all thanks to you, big brother Tian. If you hadn't taught me everything, I wouldn't have been able to go so smoothly this time." Lin Yi chuckled. "Perfect breakthrough, the strongest golden core stage expert. Really extraordinary." The will of heaven looked at Lin Yi from head to toe. His eyes lit up. In the past, Lin Yi was just a harmless little friend in his eyes. But now, Lin Yi's aura was completely new. In a trance, he actually felt a faint threat. He was now a master in the early stage of Jidan stage. So could he improve the strength of Tian-chan and Sydney to the great perfection of Foundation establishment? This experiment was very important. It was directly related to how Lin Yi would cultivate his forces in the future. So he suddenly proposed to let the 2 women go into seclusion with him. After listening to Lin Yi's idea, Tian-chan and Sydney were both surprised and happy. After coming to the Heaven Stage Island, the 2 of them had deeply understood the importance of strength. They at least needed to have the strength to protect themselves, so as to avoid bringing too much trouble to Lin Yi. The experiment began. The method used by Lin Yi was the same as when he was in the secular world. He ran the art of dragon mastery and instilled the majestic, genuine qi in his body into the two women. Sure enough, Tian-chan and Sydney were surprised to find that the majestic, genuine qi transferred from Lin Yi's hands gradually merged with their own genuine qi, and the strength of the realm also began to improve. This result immediately made Lin Yi very excited. To some extent, the value of this discovery was no less than his own success in breaking through to the Jidan stage. This meant that as long as Lin Yi was strong enough, as long as he was willing, he could turn his confidants and younger brothers into powerful masters at any time, just like when he was in the secular world. If it was only Lin Yi himself who was strong enough, others would at most be a little afraid, but not too afraid. After all, no matter how strong a person was, there would always be a weakness, especially if the strength of his confidants and younger brothers around him were weak. It would be a fatal weakness that could not be avoided. Chapter 41:36. However, if Lin Yi turned all his people into powerful experts, what kind of scene would that be? At that time, no matter how ignorant any party was, they would only dare to be in awe and would not dare to provoke him easily. Since it was proven to be effective, according to Lin Yi's character, he naturally would not stop so easily. Instead, he went one step further and went all out to improve the strength of the two women. He was an expert in the early stage of the Gold Core realm. If there were no accidents, it should be enough to forcibly promote the two women to the peak of the Foundation establishment realm. The fact was indeed as Lin Yi expected. As early as in the secular world, he was already familiar with this matter. Now, it was just a change of strength, but the principle was always the same. Everything was so logical. Under Lin Yi's full effort, the strength of the two women skyrocketed, and they were forcibly promoted to the peak of the Foundation establishment realm. Those barriers that ordinary people could not break in front of Lin Yi, a perfect Gold Core realm expert, were simply vulnerable, especially with the space of the Jade pendant constantly replenishing the vital energy. Everything seemed so natural. Feeling the surging vital energy in his body, not to mention the two women, Tian-chan and Sydney, who felt like they were in a dream. Even Lin Yi did not expect the process to be so smooth. However, when Lin Yi thought that it was a success and slowly withdrew his hand from the back of the two women, a sudden change occurred. Bang! Without warning, the clothes on the two women exploded, all torn into pieces. Even the most intimate underwear was not spared. Looking at Tian-chan and Sydney, who suddenly became naked in front of him, Lin Yi was suddenly dumbfounded, and then he could not help but swallow his saliva. No matter how calm he was, in the face of two exquisite and tender white bodies, if he did not have any reaction at all, then he would probably have to find a male hospital to see a doctor. Tian-chan and Sydney did not react at first, still immersed in the ecstasy of their strength skyrocketing until they turned their heads and saw Lin Yi's strange expression. Only then did they suddenly come to their senses. They hugged their chests and shyly lowered their heads. "How do you feel? Are you all right?" Lin Yi swallowed his saliva with difficulty and asked with concern. "No, nothing." The two women looked at each other and shook their heads, but they didn't dare to look at Lin Yi. Their faces were red to the ears. Both of them were virgins and had never appeared in front of a man with such a seductive appearance. Even if they had already given their hearts to Lin Yi, they had never really been intimate with Lin Yi before. She had not been mentally prepared for this sudden and honest meeting with him. At this moment, her two young hearts were beating wildly like fawns and were about to jump out of her throat. "That's good. I'm guessing that you're still not familiar with the surge of true qi in your bodies. Although you've reached the peak of Foundation establishment, you haven't stabilized it yet and can't control it. That's why." Lin Yi was feasting his eyes on the side. He touched his chin awkwardly and explained. "Oh." The two women nodded in unison. Then Sydney suddenly bit her lips and let go of her hands that were covering her chest. She blushed and said, "Actually, Lenny, if you want, I can." Sydney's heart had long been with Lin E. Especially when Lin E had rescued her from the abyss of bitterness. She had unconsciously thought of devoting herself to him, but she never had the chance. If Lin E hadn't mentioned it, a girl like her would naturally not have taken the initiative to offer herself. She didn't expect that she would be caught off guard, but it turned out to be like this. Huh? Lin Yi's gaze suddenly froze. But before he could react, Tian-chan on the other side also let go of her chest and bit her red lips. "I can do it too." Suddenly, the two women threw themselves into his arms at the same time. Both were as beautiful as goddesses, and both were completely naked. Lin E instantly fell into a battle of wills. He didn't think he was a gentleman. In reality, even if he was, there was no reason for him to shrink back at a time like this. If he shrank back now, he would be suspected of being worse than a beast. But time was of the essence. Faced with the temptation of such soft and fragrant jade, Lin E could only fiercely pinch his thigh and forcefully protect the last shred of clarity in his mind. He laughed bitterly. "This, little Chan, Sydney, we haven't finished our business yet, huh?" Tian-chan and Sydney glanced at each other, their faces instantly turning even redder. They both thought that this was the end. "The two of you have just broken through to the great circle of foundation establishment. The true chi in your bodies is at its most active. If you try to break through to the golden core stage, with me guiding your true chi from the side, the chances of success are still very high." As Lin E spoke, he took out the remaining 2 golden cores, as well as the star inkstone. Strictly speaking, the star inkstone was the same as elixirs. It was a consumable item. After all, the power of the stars and the power of the ocean within it was limited. Once it was all used up, it would be useless. As for the star inkstone in Lin Yi's hand, when he broke through, he had only used up half of the power of the stars and the power of the ocean to successfully condense the 10,000 gold core. Now, there was still half left, and it was just right to be used on the 2 women, Tian-chan and Sydney. Lin E knew that he wouldn't stay on Middle Island for long. Once he left, if the 2 women were still at the great circle of foundation establishment, even with the help of people like the Will of Heaven, he still wouldn't be at ease. But if the 2 women could become the strongest golden core stage experts like himself, then there was nothing to worry about. Directly break through to the golden core stage? When Tian-chan and Sydney heard this, they jumped in fright. They immediately looked at each other, even throwing the awkwardness of being honest with Lin E to the back of their minds. Before this, they were still only early-stage foundation establishment experts. Even the peak of the early-stage foundation establishment was just a dream. Now, not even half a day had passed, and they were actually preparing to break through to the golden core stage. If word of this got out, they would definitely be regarded as crazy people with wild fantasies. That's right. With this half of the star inkstone, once you succeed, it will be a perfect breakthrough. You will become golden core experts with the strongest potential. Do you want to give it a try? Lin E nodded. Golden core experts with the strongest potential. When Tian-chan and Sydney heard this, their eyes lit up. Although the 2 of them weren't battle-hungry people, with their previous tragic experiences, they knew that in this cultivation world where the weak were prey to the strong, strength was the true foundation. Naturally, the stronger the better. "Okay, I'll listen to you." The 2 women reacted for a moment, then agreed in unison. Standing in their corner, they still felt that this matter was too outrageous. But they had long since developed a kind of blind trust in Lin E. No matter what Lin E told them to do, they wouldn't have any objections. After all, everything that Lin E did was for their own good and would never harm them. Novel Bus number 119, WW. XS84. Calm. Chapter 4137. So let's get started. After Lin E told the 2 women the main points, he immediately let the 2 women take the best gold elixir and guided their true chi at the same time. Breaking through to the gold elixir stage was a major event, and there was no room for distraction. Even if the two women were beautiful, Lin Yi turned a blind eye to them at the moment. Tian Chan and Shui Li had to go through the same process of breaking through to the Golden Elixir realm, and it was also a perfect breakthrough. The process that Tian Chan and Shui Li had to go through was exactly the same as Lin Yi's. Originally, they did not have enough resources to do this, but fortunately, they had Lin Yi as a cheat. Although Lin Yi could not directly promote their strength to the early Gold Elixir stage, he could share most of the pressure for them in this difficult breakthrough process. What Lin Yi had to do was not only to guide the majestic true qi that erupted from the Gold Elixir stage for the two women to protect the meridians in their bodies, but also to use the Dan fire to refine the power of the stars for them, and use divine sense to gather the power of the sea for them. In other words, the most difficult parts of the process of breaking through to the Gold Elixir stage were taken care of by Lin Yi for Tian Chan and Sydney, and the only thing they had to do was to concentrate on condensing the Gold Elixir stage in their Dantian. 2 days passed in a flash. When Lin Yi finally came out again, the Will of Heaven, who had been guarding the Tiandan pavilion, hurriedly greeted him. Unexpectedly, Lin Yi did not say anything. The first thing he did when he came out was to run to the room of Tian Chan and Sydney and bring a set of clothes for the two women. After that, looking at the two women blushing and walking out of the retreat room with a little embarrassment, the Will of Heaven couldn't help but grin strangely and said to Lin Yi, "Brother Lin Yi, you are really envious of the blessing of having two women. I was wondering what you were going to do with them in such a hurry. You even purposely made the Tiandan pavilion close down. I didn't expect you to be such a playboy." Big brother Tian, you're thinking too much." Lin Yi was speechless. He pointed at the two girls and said, "Can't you see the changes in them?" Change. The Will of Heaven was stunned when he heard that. When he looked at Tian Chan and Sydney again, there was no longer any ridicule in his eyes. Immediately, he became extremely shocked. Gold core, early stage. How is this possible? Just 3 days ago, the two women were still immature early stage foundation establishment experts, but after 3 days, they were now genuine early stage gold core experts like Lin Yi. Moreover, the Will of Heaven could faintly sense a strange aura from the two women. Although it was much weaker than Lin Yi's, it was obviously the same. In other words, the two women were also the strongest gold core masters who had a perfect breakthrough. This kind of thing was completely unheard of and unseen. Even though the Will of Heaven was experienced and knowledgeable, he was so shocked that he almost bit his tongue. He couldn't say a word for a long time. "Lil bro Lin Yi, this is all you're doing?" 3 of the strongest golden core stage experts in one go. Tianxing took a long time to calm down and asked with his mouth agape. Although the miracle happened to Tian Chan and Sydney, the Will of Heaven could use his toes to think that this was definitely the work of Lin Yi. Otherwise, it would be impossible for the two women to do this. There's no other way. If I don't improve their strength, I will always be worried. Lin Yi smiled faintly. "Brother, you're going against the natural order." The Will of Heaven could only say one sentence in the end. Although he was very curious about how Lin Yi suddenly improved the strength of the two women to such a terrifying realm, he knew without asking. This was definitely the biggest secret of Lin Yi. The fewer people who knew, the better. After all, this matter was too unbelievable. Before this, he still thought that Tian Chan and Sydney served Lin Yi together. Would it be too unfair for them? After all, although Lin Yi was good, the two women were also peerless beauties. No matter where they went, they were the stars surrounding the moon. However, now it seemed that the two of them could follow Lin Yi. Not only did they not feel wronged, but it was also a great blessing for them. Even the Will of Heaven couldn't help but have a ridiculous feeling at this moment. He always thought that he was already amazing and legendary. But compared with his brother Lin Yi, what he did in the past was simply child's play. It was not worth mentioning at all. The word against the natural order. The Will of Heaven really didn't just exclaim casually. At this moment, he really felt that Lin Yi was really a monster who could go against the natural order. While they were talking, Ho Guanxi and Kai Zhongyang also came to inquire every day, as usual. Suddenly, they saw the three strongest gold core stage masters of Lin Yi. Their performance was worse than the will of heaven. Their jaws dropped on the spot, and they couldn't say a word for a long time. "Monster, you're really a monster. I'm afraid even my master can't compare to you." This was the unanimous conclusion that everyone finally came to. Lin Yi could only smile bitterly at this. He thought to himself, "Your master is my cheap master. If I'm a monster, then isn't he also an old monster?" Since they had successfully come out of seclusion, the business of Tiandan Pavilion naturally reopened. Tianchan and Sydney then began to be busy again. Sydney was the main manager of the business as usual, while Tianchan focused on alchemy. Now that her strength had skyrocketed to the early stages of golden elixir, the speed and quality of her elixir concoction, including the success rate, had obviously increased by a large margin compared to before. She even had the chance to concoct fourth-grade elixir. To the heavenly elixir court, which only relied on her and Lin Yi to concoct elixirs, this was naturally good news. As for Lin Yi, he couldn't take care of the business of Tiandan Pavilion for a short time. The reason was very simple. He was busy refining the gathering nascent soul golden elixir for the will of heaven. The will of heaven had the elixir recipe. Ho Guanxi and Kai Zhongyang provided the materials. What Lin Yi had to do was to try to refine the 6th grade gathering nascent soul golden elixir. This time, as Lin Yi expected, after his strength reached the early stage of gold core, the strength of his true qi was enough to refine the 6th grade elixir. As for how to refine it, with the divine armament cauldron, an automatic alchemy artifact, Lin Yi didn't need to worry too much. The only thing he had to do was to control the strength of his true qi, so that the divine armament cauldron could control the fire and wait for the alchemy to be completed. After a whole day and night, Lin Yi didn't disappoint everyone. He succeeded in refining a gathering nascent soul golden elixir on his first attempt. When he finally handed it over to the will of heaven, everyone looked at him with eyes that were no longer strange. He could cure the terminal illness of the will of heaven, and he could make 3 of the strongest masters of gold core stage at once. Was it strange that this kind of freak could refine the 6th grade gathering nascent soul golden elixir? With the 6th grade gathering nascent soul golden elixir in hand, the will of heaven, who was eager to restore his strength, immediately took it on the spot and then began to condense the yuanying. Chapter 41:38. Lin Yi did not stand by and watch, but followed him in a closed-door training so that he could protect him. After all, according to the will of heaven himself, every time he broke through such a big realm, it was very dangerous, and his meridians might burst. With Lin Yi by his side, he could save him in time so that it would not lead to another tragedy. In addition, it was definitely a rare experience and reference for anyone to observe someone condensing their nascent soul, especially a legendary master like the will of heaven. When it was Lin Yi's turn in the future, it would be much easier. The difficulty of condensing a nascent soul was countless times more difficult than condensing a gold core. Since ancient times, there were countless masters who were stuck at this threshold. No matter how well prepared they were in advance, the success rate was always so low. However, after all, the will of heaven had condensed successfully before. This time, strictly speaking, it was just to restore his nascent soul, so the difficulty was much lower. Under Lin Yi's protection, he finally successfully condensed his nascent soul. After that, the will of heaven did not choose to come out immediately, but decided to take advantage of the opportunity to restore his peak strength in one fell swoop. After breaking through the threshold of condensing his nascent soul, there was no barrier that could stop the footsteps of the will of heaven. Just a few days later, the will of heaven successfully came out, and his strength had been restored to the peak state of the peak nascent soul stage. With the powerful strength to stand at the top of the heaven stage island again, the will of heaven was now naturally full of confidence. According to his straightforward character, there was no reason to continue to endure the humiliation he suffered last time, so he immediately went to the Island Master's Pavilion again without saying anything. The Island Master's Pavilion was located at the top of the middle tripod mountain. As the name suggested, it was a place that only the Island Master could enter and exit. The Island Master's Pavilion had always been composed of 5 people, 1 Island Master, 4 Deputy Island Masters. This time, when Tianxing reappeared in the Island Master's Pavilion, the situation was exactly the same as before. The Island Master of the Middle Island still used the reason that he had been absent for too long as an excuse and did not comment on the matter of him being reinstated as a Deputy Island Master. As for the other 3 Deputy Island Masters, they all found all sorts of excuses and avoided the topic. Everyone, I have never mistreated any of you in the past years. I've never offended you. So why do you have to make things difficult for me on this matter that is perfectly justified? What's in it for you? The will of heaven sneered at the 4 Island Masters. Then, without waiting for the 4 of them to speak, the will of heaven directly released his peak nascent soul aura without holding back. Everyone's expression changed. They were already surprised when they learned that the will of heaven had recovered from his injuries. They thought that no matter how powerful the will of heaven was, it would take him at least a few months to recover his full strength. Who would have thought that in just a few days he would be able to do it? Everyone here, other than Tianxing, were all Xian ascending stage cultivators. If it was any other peak nascent soul cultivator, they wouldn't take him seriously at all, but the will of heaven was different. This guy couldn't be treated like an ordinary person. The number of Xian ascending stage masters who died in his hands in the past wasn't just 1 or 2. Killing someone with a higher level was a challenge in the eyes of others, but to the will of heaven, it was a common occurrence. He couldn't do it just because his level was low. He had to treat it as if it was nothing. At least, in terms of pure combat strength, even if the will of heaven wasn't the strongest among them, he was at least in the middle. Including the Middle Island Master, no one here dared to say that they had a 100% chance of winning against him. Facing the will of heaven's aura, everyone's expression started to change. Strength determined the right to speak. Before, the will of heaven hadn't recovered his full strength, so they didn't take him seriously. But now, they didn't dare to be so arrogant anymore. Everyone looked at each other, and the 3 Vice Island Masters didn't say anything. They all looked at each other. This ball was kicked to the feet of the Middle Island Master. According to the rules, if you don't report to the Island Master's Pavilion for 10 years, in theory, you have already given up your position. Even Zhang Liju, the honorary Island Master, has never not reported for 10 years in a row. The Island Master looked at the will of heaven and said in a low voice, "Could it be that you want to change the rules of the Island Master's Pavilion with your own strength? I wouldn't dare, but I was heavily injured before, and it wasn't on purpose that I didn't report. Rules are dead, but people are alive. You guys shouldn't be so inconsiderate, right?" The will of heaven said angrily. For 1,000 years, the rules of the Island Master's Pavilion have never been broken. This rule will not be broken in my hands. The Island Master said expressionlessly. The will of heaven still wanted to argue, but one of the Vice Island Masters standing not far from him suddenly gave him a look. This person's name was Chu Wentian, and he was the closest to the will of heaven. Although they weren't sworn brothers, they got along well, and the key thing was that the 2 of them never had any conflicts, so their relationship had always been good. This problem can't be solved with just a few words. In my opinion, Xing, you should give everyone some time to think about it. Chu Wentian came out to smooth things over. Although the will of heaven was unwilling, he still nodded. He wasn't someone who would let things slide, but he could see that the situation wasn't looking good. If he continued to be so stubborn, it would only push the Island Master and the other Vice Island Masters to the opposite side. Once their relationship was strained, it would be even more difficult to deal with. Stepping out of the door, the will of heaven was pulled to the side by Chu Wentian. He wanted to understand what was going on. Actually, even if there are rules, Xing, your special situation can be handled differently. Chu Wentian comforted him. The reason why he didn't say anything the last time the will of heaven came was because the will of heaven's strength was too low at that time. He didn't even have the qualifications to know the inside story, so it would be useless to tell him. But now, the situation was naturally different. I can also guess that something must have happened in the middle. Just tell me what happened behind the scenes. Tianxing waved his hand and said, "All right, then I'll be frank with you. Your position has been targeted by someone," Chu Wentian said with a bitter smile. "Who?" The will of heaven's eyelids twitched, and he was instantly enraged. Although he had some guesses, he didn't expect that someone would really dare to touch his whiskers. They even wanted to snatch his position as Vice Island Master. Had they forgotten his illustrious achievements in the past? Cultivator College, Aurora Australis, is now the Vice Dean, Chu Wentian said bluntly. He wasn't familiar with Aurora Australis. To him, if his old friend the Will of Heaven could keep his position as Vice Island Master, it would obviously be more beneficial. Chapter 41:39. However, that was as far as he could help the Will of Heaven. At most, he could provide some information and sell a favor. He could not openly help the Will of Heaven deal with Southern Aurora Polaris. After all, the Will of Heaven was not that close to him. Southern Aurora Polaris was able to compete for the position of Deputy Island Master, so he was naturally not a weakling. It was obviously not worth it to offend such a powerhouse for the sake of a favor from the Will of Heaven. Southern Aurora Polaris? The eyes of the Will of Heaven could not help but reveal a frightening, killing intent. He asked in a deep voice, "Has this matter already been decided?" "Not yet, but it's basically decided internally. All that's left is the final step of holding a meeting and voting. If Xing had recovered a few days later, I reckon there would be nothing left for you. After all, from the current situation, the Island Master and the other two all support him." Chu Wentian shook his head and smiled bitterly. In his opinion, even if the Will of Heaven's strength had recovered to its peak, it would still be very difficult for him to keep the position of Deputy Island Master. Even if he chose to abstain, the other three, including the Island Master, supported Southern Aurora Polaris. It was easier said than done for the Will of Heaven to change their minds in a short period of time. Moreover, the Will of Heaven had never been a person who was good at making friends. In the past, his relationship with the other three was very ordinary. At this time, he would not lower his head to speak up for them unless the sun rose from the west. "Fine. Since that's the case, I'll grant them their wish." The Will of Heaven suddenly sneered. "Ah." Chu Wentian was stunned and said in surprise, "You plan to give up just like that? It doesn't seem like your usual style, Xing. Since they all support Southern Aurora Polaris, what else can I do? I can't possibly force them to change their minds, right? Although I'm confident, I'm not that arrogant. Since that's the case, I might as well grant them their wish." "What do you say, old friend?" the Will of Heaven said with an unfathomable expression. You're right, but no matter how I think about it, I don't think you'll be willing to endure it." Xing, what are your plans? There's no need to hide it from me, right?" Chu Wentian looked at the Will of Heaven with a puzzled expression. "It's very simple. If they support Southern Polar Light, then let them support him. However, on the day he takes office, whether or not Southern Polar Light can truly sit on the position of Middle Island's Deputy Island Master will depend on whether or not he has the ability," the Will of Heaven said with a cold gaze. "Don't tell me. You want to challenge him?" Chu Wentian was shocked and then came to a sudden realization. Heaven Rank Island had always encouraged geniuses to stand out. Even the position of Middle Island's Vice Island Master, who was at the pinnacle of power, could be given to him on the day he took office. Challenge him. However, there was a precondition for this. The challenger's strength must be lower than the predecessor's. Otherwise, if it was purely bullying the weak, then the challenger wouldn't be considered a shocking genius expert. Naturally, there was no need to make an exception to promote the challenger. Although this rule had existed since ancient times, there were very few opportunities for it to take effect. After all, those who could compete for the position of Deputy Island Master were the best among the experts of the same level. Even among the experts of the same level, They belonged to the top or even invincible existence. Letting someone whose strength was lower than him challenge him would have even less chance of winning. When that day comes, even the Island Master and the other two won't be able to stop me. The will of heaven's eyes were surging with battle intent. After being injured for so many years, he hadn't felt this kind of excitement for a long time. This, Xing Xing, are you sure you want to do this? That southern polar light is a mysterious ascending early stage expert. Chu Wentian couldn't help but remind him. So what? The number of mysterious ascending stage experts who died in the hands of me, the will of heaven, is not one or two. Do you think I'll be afraid of him? The will of heaven smiled confidently. That's true. You've always regarded challenging above your level as a common thing. Hearing this, Chu Wentian couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. Now that I think about it, why do I feel that the rules of this challenge are simply tailor-made for you? Things that others couldn't do, when put to the will of heaven, were just child's play. The phrase tailor-made was really not fake. The only thing I'm worried about now is that when the time comes, Southern Polar Light will be thick-skinned and refuse to accept the challenge no matter what. Then I'll really be at my wit's end. The will of heaven said worriedly, "Don't worry about this. If he doesn't accept the challenge face-to-face, then he can't take up the position. Even if he avoids you later and lets him take up the position secretly, it won't be justifiable, and he won't be able to convince the public." Chu Wentian laughed and said, "So I believe that no matter who is in his position, it's impossible to avoid the challenge. After all, he's a mysterious ascending stage expert, but he's afraid of you, a nascent soul stage expert. This is too shameful." "I hope so." The will of heaven nodded. Although his battle achievements in the past were shocking, it had been a long time since then. So much time had passed, and the deterrence was already much weaker. And any mysterious ascending stage expert would definitely be extremely arrogant and would definitely not be willing to lose face easily. For someone like Southern Polar Light, who was about to make a name for himself, even if he was afraid of him, he shouldn't be afraid in front of him. A few days later, with the unanimous approval of the Island Master Pavilion and the support of the forces behind him, the joyous day of Southern Polar Light taking up the position of Middle Island's Deputy Island Master finally arrived. This day was destined to be remembered in history, because this was the first time that someone from the Cultivators Academy had sought the glorious position of the pinnacle of Middle Island's power. The Island Master's Pavilion, which had always been closed to the public, opened its doors for a rare occasion on this day. Almost all the influential figures of all the sects and forces on Central Island were invited to attend, cheering for Southern Aurora Polaris, the new Vice Island Master. Now, what a grand scene! He followed the will of heaven and walked in the crowd. Feeling the powerful aura of the people around him, he couldn't help but sigh. The people who came today were all the top big shots of the various forces. He was an early-stage Golden Core expert. Although he had a perfect breakthrough and had the potential to become the strongest Golden Core expert, compared to these super experts who were at the nascent soul stage or even the mysterious ascending stage, he was still too far behind. They were not on the same level at all. It can be seen that this Southern Polar Light's background isn't simple. Otherwise, just based on his title as the Cultivators Academy's Deputy Dean, these people would definitely not come in person. At most, they would send a congratulatory letter over. The will of heaven said lightly. In the past, whether it was him or the other 3 Deputy Island Masters, when they took up their positions, it was far from this exaggerated. Southern Polar Light's vast lineup was even comparable to that of the Island Master. Could it be that Southern Polar Light's other background is the Central Chamber of Commerce? He looked at Si Hai Xiao, who was chatting cheerfully with Southern Polar Light, and couldn't help but make a guess. Chapter 4140. He truly did not expect that the person competing with Tian Xing for the position of Deputy Island Master would actually be Southern Sky Aurora, an old rival that he had interacted with in the secular world. What was even more unexpected was that Southern Sky Aurora was actually in cahoots with Si Hai Xiao. This made him involuntarily think of the recently rising Central Chamber of Commerce. As a master in the early stages of the profound ascension stage, Nantion Aurora's senses were extremely sharp. Lin, he had only glanced at him once, and he immediately sensed it. After carefully identifying Lin Yi's appearance, he was shocked, and his expression changed. Separating the crowd, Southern Polar Light and Si Haishao immediately walked in front of Lin Yi. As the protagonist of today's event, Southern Polar Light naturally attracted everyone's attention. "I didn't expect to meet you on such an occasion, Lin Yi. I really don't know if you're unlucky or if you're just so untactful that you insist on rushing over to let me take care of you." Southern Polar Light sneered at Lin Yi. Previously in the secular world, he already disliked Lin Yi, and he had also heard from Si Haishao about the conflict between Lin Yi and the Nantion brothers. If Lin Yi had hidden far away, it would have been fine, and he would not have bothered to waste energy looking for him. But now that this fellow actually came to his door, how could he not take care of him? Although Southern Polar Light had to take care of his image in the presence of so many pairs of eyes today, it was not a big problem to take care of a small fry like Lin Yi. He could use him as a stepping stone to show his strength. Lin Yi frowned slightly. He was in the early stage of the Gold Core stage, while the other party was in the early stage of the Profound Ascension stage. There was a difference of 2 whole stages. At this moment, it was already very difficult for him to withstand the other party's pressure, not to mention actually fighting. However, in front of Southern Polar Light, even if he knew that he was no match for Lin Yi, it was impossible for him to admit defeat. Moreover, there was no need for him to appear on such an occasion. Southern Polar Light's opponent was not him. You haven't taken the position of Deputy Island Master yet, and you're already putting on airs. You're already starting to put on airs. You have quite the style, sir. Tianxing took a step forward, shielding Lin Yi behind him as he sneered at Nantion Aurora. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Nantion Aurora suddenly felt the overbearing aura of the will of heaven, causing him to unconsciously take a step back. Then, he reacted with anger and shame. He was an expert at the early stage of the profound ascending stage. How could he be afraid of a mere nascent soul-perfected stage cultivator? The will of heaven. This is a personal grudge between me and him. I advise you not to interfere. Chapter 41:41. The Island Master's Pavilion was located at the peak of the Middle Cauldron Mountain, and it was already high up in the clouds. Now that Southern Sky, Aurora, and the Will of Heaven were confronting each other, their auras intertwining, even the sky above everyone's head was changing, as though a storm was about to arrive. The Will of Heaven. I really wonder if you've been injured for too long that even your brain is damaged. Killing someone with a higher cultivation level is just a reputation that's blown out of proportion. Do you really think that you can deal with me with the strength of a mere nascent soul great perfection? You really don't know how to write the word death. Southern Sky, Aurora, sneered in front of everyone. What's the point of saying so much? Let's just fight. If you don't know how to write the word death, then I can trouble myself to teach you. The Will of Heaven moved his neck and the joints of his hands and feet as he walked straight towards Southern Sky, Aurora. Teach your ass. Southern Sky, Aurora's expression suddenly froze, and his expression became even uglier. With a ferocious expression, he rushed towards the Will of Heaven. His whole body was surrounded by a powerful true chi that seemed to have materialized, constantly changing various moves. One moment it was a palm, the next moment it was a claw, the next moment it was a fist, and there were even various kinds of weapons. Regardless of what ordinary people could think of or not, they could all be found in the materialized true chi. With such unpredictable moves, the bystanders already felt that it was troublesome just by looking at them. Legend has it that Southern Sky Aurora is an expert who cultivates the non-phase divine technique. Seeing him today, he really lives up to his reputation. A knowledgeable expert in the crowd exclaimed in admiration. That's right. The non-phase divine technique can copy any martial arts moves. Before being hit by him, it's impossible to even judge which martial arts he is using. It's impossible to guard against him. He's really powerful. Looking at Southern Sky Aurora's moves, he has mastered at least 20 to 30 martial arts. He has been a chancellor in the Cultivator Academy for so many years. It seems that he has put in a lot of hard work. I think the will of heaven is in danger this time. Southern Sky Aurora is obviously not an ordinary profound ascension stage expert. If he was at his peak in the past, he might have a chance to wrestle. But now that he has been injured for so many years, his Yuan Qi definitely hasn't recovered. My Yuan Qi must not have recovered. As the crowd discussed, the Southern Sky Aurora had already started exchanging blows with the will of heaven. In just one exchange, the will of heaven was mercilessly engulfed by several dozen powerful martial techniques. Southern Sky Aurora's attack was not one move at a time like everyone had imagined. Instead, it was all at once. He was a profound ascension early-stage expert, so his true Qi reserves were far more abundant than the will of heaven's nascent soul great circle. Naturally, he could withstand such consumption. He had not been the chancellor of the Cultivator Academy for so many years for nothing. Southern Aurora Borealis understood the principle that even a lion would use its full strength to capture a rabbit. There was only one reason why so many powerhouses had failed miserably, and that was because they had underestimated the enemy. Although Southern Sky Aurora had never fought with the will of heaven before, he did not even need to think to know that the will of heaven definitely had some kind of heaven-defying martial technique that allowed him to challenge those of a higher cultivation level. If he was given a chance, he might really succeed in his counterattack. Therefore, the safest method was to suppress him with all his might right from the start, not giving him even the slightest chance. In an instant, the will of heaven was completely submerged. Everyone present could not help but look at each other, and their gazes towards Southern Sky Aurora Borealis were a little more fearful. This guy was indeed worthy of being a ruthless person who could compete for the position of Deputy Island Master. Using dozens of martial techniques at the same time, if they were in the will of heaven's position. At this time, they would probably be blasted to smithereens. After gaining the upper hand in the first exchange, Southern Sky Aurora's subsequent performance was completely unforgiving. He used dozens of powerful martial techniques to firmly trap the will of heaven. From start to finish, this lasted for a full half an incense stick of time. Everyone present could not help but raise their eyebrows. Under the shroud of true Qi, although they could not clearly see the will of heaven's current miserable state, they could tell from the continuously collapsing and cracking ground under his feet that even if the will of heaven was not dead, he was definitely not far from it. Such a fierce attack would practically kill an ordinary nascent soul great circle expert if they came into contact with it. Even a profound ascension early-stage expert of the same level would not be able to withstand Southern Sky Aurora Borealis's martial techniques. You're not dead yet? If you're not dead yet, open your mouth and beg for mercy. I might be merciful and spare your little life. No matter what, you're a legendary figure of this generation, and you're also the previous Deputy Island Master. If I were to kill you just like that, I'm afraid that others will say that I'm narrow-minded and have no tolerance for others. So, I could consider leaving you a way out, ha ha ha. Southern Sky Aurora Borealis laughed wildly, pleased with himself. Everyone else also revealed expressions that they could not bear to look straight at him. Although the will of heaven was once awesome for a time, it was now a thing of the past. In front of Southern Sky Aurora Borealis, he simply did not have the ability to retaliate. Leaving me a way out? Do I still have to thank you that day? The will of heaven's voice suddenly rang out. Everyone present was instantly bewildered, looking in disbelief at the area in the middle that was being bombarded by dozens of martial techniques. You're actually not dead yet? Southern Sky Aurora Borealis turned pale with fright, subconsciously taking a few steps back. Hee, isn't your question a little too strange? Do you think that these ticklish moves of yours can kill me? Your Excellency, you're looking down on me too much. The will of heaven still could not be seen. Only his voice could be heard. You just putting on airs. Do you think you can scare me like this? You're too naive. Southern Sky Aurora Borealis instantly reacted. Then, disregarding everything else, he attacked with all his might, vowing to kill the will of heaven in one fell swoop. However, in the next moment, the will of heaven merely punched with his bare hands, and his various powerful martial techniques instantly vanished into thin air, as if they had never appeared at all. As for the will of heaven's body, not to mention any injuries, not even a speck of dust could be seen on him. How is this possible? How is this possible? Southern Sky Aurora Borealis was so frightened that he retreated continuously. Even if you beat him to death, he would never have thought that the non-phase divine technique that he was so proud of would have no lethality at all against the will of heaven. If he had not witnessed it with his own eyes, no one would have believed him if he said it out loud. I've said it long ago. The number of profound ascension stage experts that have died in my hands isn't just one or two. As for a profound ascension stage like you, just save it. Before the will of heaven's voice had even faded, he had already punched Southern Sky Aurora Borealis with his bare hands. Boom! There was no sign of any leakage of true chi, nor was there any strange power. However, Southern Sky Aurora Borealis suddenly felt as if he had been hit by a 10,000-ton hammer. He was directly sent flying out of the peak of the Middle Calder Mountain. With a wail, Southern Sky Aurora Borealis was like a kite with a broken string. He directly fell into the sea of clouds outside the mountain peak, disappearing in an instant. The entire place was dead silent. Everyone could not help but look at each other. Their gazes towards the will of heaven were also filled with shock and fear. This turn of events was too sudden and fast. Chapter 41-42. Middle Cauldron Mountain was the highest mountain in Middle Island. The distance between the peak and the ground was at least 3,000 meters. Even a profound ascension expert would not be able to withstand falling down like that. Moreover, Southern Aurora was clearly seriously injured by the punch just now. This, the will of heaven, was indeed a ruthless character who ran amok in Middle Island back then. A dignified, early-stage, profound ascension expert was easily defeated by a punch. The name of killing someone with a higher cultivation level was indeed well-deserved. While everyone was shocked, Si-Hai Xiao, who was originally very close to Southern Aurora, was glanced at by the will of heaven from afar. He was so scared that his scalp went numb. He did not dare to stay here any longer and hurriedly led his people down the mountain. Although Southern Aurora was punched down on Middle Calder Mountain and was inevitably seriously injured, he might not really die. As long as he could be found in time, there might be a chance of survival. After all, he was an early-stage profound ascension expert. His vitality was much stronger than a cockroach. Among the crowd that followed Si-Hai Xiao and left in a hurry, Lin Yi was surprised to find the figure of an old rival. It was Patriarch Xianxin. Although Lin Yi was surprised by this sudden discovery, he was not unprepared. After all, Cindy had previously said that Patriarch Xianxin had been transported to Middle Island with them. Previously, when they were in the secular world, Xianxin had been fawning on Southern Aurora in all sorts of ways. Now that he was in Middle Island, it was not strange at all. Moreover, Xianxin was dressed in the same uniform as the others around him. If he was not mistaken, he should be from the Cultivator College. Looking at Xuanxin's back, the corner of Lin Yi's mouth involuntarily curled up. If it were not for the fact that this gathering of big shots was too sensitive, he would definitely make a move to keep him here. However, since he already knew that the other party was from the Cultivator College, it would not be a problem to deal with him next time. Anyway, with Lin Yi's current early-stage golden core strength, Xianxin should no longer be his opponent. The crowd was dead silent for a long time, under everyone's gaze. Only then did the island master of Middle Island announce, helplessly, the will of heaven succeeded in his challenge. I hereby announce that from today onwards, the will of heaven will return to the position of the vice island master of Middle Island. The crowd instantly burst into an uproar again. Although this was within reason, they had come today with the intention of cheering for Southern Polar Light. They did not expect that in the blink of an eye, the main character would be changed to the will of heaven. How could they endure this? However, to be able to become the leader of a faction, one had to be extremely powerful. These people were naturally shrewd and thick-skinned. They immediately suppressed their unnaturalness and surrounded the will of heaven to congratulate him. After today's battle, there was no doubt about Tianxing's abilities. As a cultivator at the original completion realm, he was already one of the few who stood at the very top. That, coupled with the fact that he was the vice island leader of the Middle Island, meant that no clan dared to provoke him. Even if he couldn't make friends with them, at least he couldn't let the will of heaven bear a grudge because of what happened today. Otherwise, they would be inviting a huge disaster for no reason. However, in the face of these big shots' insincere compliments, the will of heaven simply couldn't be bothered to respond. He directly strode over to Lin Yi, and the two of them shook hands and chatted happily. Big Brother Heaven, we have to celebrate when we go back today. You killed Southern Polar Light in one move. Regaining the position of the Vice Island Master is a joyous occasion. Lin Yi said with a smile. That goes without saying. Let's go back and drink to our heart's content. However, it's all thanks to you, Brother Lin Yi, that I can be where I am today. Today, I have to properly toast to you. The will of heaven said with a hearty laugh. Big Brother Heaven, your words are too serious. I'm nothing more than a logistical support for you. To be able to do this, your strength is the foundation. To be honest, I was really a little worried just now. Lin Yi said with some lingering fear. He was now only at the early stage of the Gold Core realm. His eyesight was still not enough to see through such a high-level confrontation. Just now, when the will of heaven was hit head-on by Southern Polar Light, and at first glance, it seemed that he had no power to fight back. His palms were really sweating. Brother, you don't have to be surprised. The overbearing power of our creation battle art is not just for show. Crushing those of the same level, or even those of a higher level, is a very normal thing. Southern Polar Light is just a half-baked profound ascension early stage, so you don't need to pay attention to him at all. When you reach this level, you will know what I mean. The will of heaven explained with a smile. Big Brother Heaven, since you put it like that, I'm really looking forward to it. However, I'm only at the early stage of the Gold Core realm now. I don't know how long I'll have to wait to reach the full circle of the original Soul realm. Lin Yi was both excited and emotional. The higher the realm, the longer the process of training, and the harder it was to break through. It was very normal for people to be stuck at the Gold Core realm for tens or hundreds of years without any progress, not to mention the original Soul realm, which was above that. Others might have to wait for God knows how long. But for you, Brother Lin Yi, I dare to bet that it definitely won't take long. The will of heaven said with a face of certainty. After all the things that had happened before, in his eyes, Lin Yi's degree of insanity was even higher than that of the pill God Zhang Liju. If even a freak like him was stuck at the Gold Core in Original Soul Realm, the will of heaven would rather cut off his head and kick it like a ball. I hope so. Then thank you for your auspicious words, Big Brother Heaven. Lin Yi laughed out loud. Looking at the backs of Lin Yi and the will of heaven leaving, the group of big shots, including the Middle Island Master, all had complicated expressions. Only Chu Wentian, who had done the will of heaven a favor, had a relaxed expression at this moment. In the crowd, the grandfather and grandson duo, Zheng Dongjue and Zheng Tianchu, had even more ugly expressions. They had come today with the intention of watching the will of heaven lose his position as the Vice Island Master, to see him embarrass himself, but they didn't expect such an unexpected turn of events. More importantly, killing Nantian Aurora in one move, such a terrifying and domineering strength. Just thinking about it made their hearts heavy. Zheng Dongjue, as the Vice Hall Master of the Dan Hall, couldn't help but tremble in the face of such a monster. I think, let's just forget about the matter with Tianchu. You better not go looking for trouble. This guy, the will of heaven, is an idiot. If you really piss him off, who knows what he will do. When that time comes, even I, your grandfather, can't protect you. Zheng Dongju sighed helplessly and said faintly. He was speaking the truth. Because he hadn't seen the will of heaven's real strength before, he didn't know how much strength he had recovered, so he still had a sliver of hope in his heart. But now, if he still had this kind of fantasy, then he would really be an idiot. Grandpa, grandson understands. Zheng Tianchu gritted his teeth unwillingly. But no matter how stupid he wasn't that stupid after all. Zheng Dongjue's words were not alarmist talk. After today's battle, the will of heaven had already become the original legendary expert who ran amok in Middle Island, and his reputation was like the sun in the sky again. If he really dared to provoke Tian Shan when he was killed by the will of heaven, no one would speak up for him, and Zheng Dongjue would even have to apologize for him. Chapter 41-43. You can't accept it, right? Zheng Dongjue glanced at him and smiled bitterly. I can't accept it either, but there's nothing we can do about it. We have to bow our heads when it's time. But you don't have to be discouraged. As the saying goes, when prosperity reaches its peak, someone will come out to take care of the will of heaven for being so arrogant and overbearing. I'm sure he won't be arrogant for long. When that time comes, you'll be able to follow your heart. Anyway, Tian Shan is our Zheng family's daughter-in-law. No one could take her away from us. Yes, Grandpa, you're the one who sees things clearly. Don't worry, I can endure it. Zheng Tianchu nodded heavily. A few days later, at the Cultivator Academy, after mobilizing all the people in the academy and a group of experts from the Central Chamber of Commerce, Hai Xiao led people to search the vast forest of Middle Calder Mountain for 3 days and 3 nights before finally finding Southern Sky, Aurora, who had fallen into the quagmire. At this moment, Southern Sky, Aurora, the high and mighty early stage profound ascension expert, had already become a drowned rat on his last breath. If they had found him a few days later, he would probably have become a cold corpse. After receiving a fatal punch from Tianxing, and then being thrown from the peak of the Middle Calder Mountain, which was more than 3,000 meters high, it was already a miracle that Southern Aurora Polaris was still able to hold on until now. The tenacity of a mysterious ascension expert's life force was indeed extraordinary. But even so, when Southern Sky Aurora was carried back to the Cultivator Academy, he was still like a dead dog, only 1 step away from death. When he heard this news, Patriarch Black Earth, who was searching elsewhere, immediately rushed to Nantian Aurora's cultivation cave abode. The moment he walked in, he started wailing in grief and indignation. His wails were heart-wrenching and heart-wrenching. Extreme grief. What are you crying for? Hai Xiao glanced at him, frowned, and scolded. It's not like he's dead. What are you crying for? This kind of injury is nothing to our Central Chamber of Commerce. We have plenty of spirit jades. No matter how serious the injury is, we can cure it. We can even save the dead. Stop crying for me. His words were like that of a nouveau riche. That's how rich you are. So D. Nantion is fine? Patriarch Xianshun was taken aback. She heaved a sigh of relief, and only then did she bitterly stop crying. Of course it's fine. Otherwise, do you think our Central Chamber of Commerce is useless? Hai Xiao smiled proudly. Then he sized up the Black Earth Patriarch and asked, if I remember correctly, the Black Earth Patriarch is the Black Earth Patriarch. You seem to be the follower that old friend Nantion brought here from the secular world. I think he even introduced you to me before. Yes. I didn't expect Manager C to still remember me. I'm truly honored. Patriarch Black Earth nodded repeatedly. When he was in the secular world, he was a high and mighty boss, but when he arrived at the Heavenly Island, he had to change his mindset and behave with his tail between his legs. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to achieve his ambitions. They wouldn't even live long. Since my old friend Southern Sky thinks so highly of you, then I won't treat you as an outsider. You can stay for a few days. Stay here and serve old friend Nantion, Hai Xiao said lightly. Thank you, Manager C. I had the same intention. Patriarch Black Earth Patriarch hurriedly agreed. If he was in the secular world, he would definitely slap the other party to death if he the boss of the Five Elements sect, was asked to serve someone else. But at this moment, not only was he not worried at all, instead, he was overjoyed. Even if he lost to the will of heaven, Nantion Aurora was still the Cultivator Academy's vice dean. He was still a super expert at the mysterious Ascension early stage. To be able to have the opportunity to serve such a great figure. To him, it wasn't a matter of being bullied, but a genuine blessing. This kind of rare opportunity couldn't even be begged for normally. Black Earth Patriarch believed that as long as he served Nantion Aurora wholeheartedly, he would definitely value him more after he recovered, and he would definitely benefit from it. As it turned out, Si Haixiao's words weren't empty words. Under the treatment of the Central Chamber of Commerce's sacred healing medicine, the dying Nantion Aurora quickly returned from the gates of hell and regained consciousness. Although his injuries were too severe and he couldn't fully recover in a short period of time, at least Nantion Aurora finally regained consciousness and could speak. Manager C, I'm really grateful to you this time. If it wasn't for you, I'm afraid I would have. Nantion Aurora expressed his gratitude with a face full of gratitude. Hee, we're a family, so there's no need to stand on ceremony. Old friend Nantion, we're on the same side. Saving you is my duty, and it's something I should do. There's no need to be so courteous with me. Si Haixiao immediately shook his head and waved his hand. Sigh. It was supposed to be a great thing, but I didn't expect someone like the will of heaven to appear out of nowhere and ruin our great plan. This is intolerable. Nantion Aurora gritted his teeth and said hatefully. A moment before the challenge from the will of heaven, he was still the glorious vice island master of Middle Island. He was riding on the crest of success, but he didn't expect to fall to dust in the blink of an eye. Now, he was probably the laughingstock of the entire Middle Island. I also didn't expect the will of heaven to be so powerful. Even you, old friend Nantion, aren't his match. Didn't you say that he had just recovered from his heavy injuries? How did he recover his strength so quickly? Si Haixiao said with a puzzled expression. I also thought it was inconceivable, so I wasn't mentally prepared at all. That's why I was caught off guard by him. Nantion Aurora found an excuse for himself unwillingly, and then said, compared to this, I'm actually more puzzled about how this guy suddenly recovered. His meridians have been injured for so many years, and rumor has it that even Zhang Liju couldn't heal him. I didn't expect him to recover so suddenly. How strange. Right, I've been puzzled about this too. Even our Central Chamber of Commerce's intelligence department couldn't find out about this. They only found out a rough explanation, saying that he was healed by a foreign medicine master. Si Haixiao nodded in agreement. When the news of the will of heaven recovering spread out, it had already caused quite a commotion in Middle Island. Such an important figure, like the will of heaven, would naturally attract the Central Chamber of Commerce's attention. However, Middle Island's Alchemy Hall was different from ordinary sections. Even they couldn't easily infiltrate it, so they couldn't obtain clear information. Foreign medicine master? The Shinshin elder, who was at the side, froze when he heard this. He suddenly interrupted thoughtfully. If that's the case, I think it's very likely that Lenny did it. Didn't he walk together with the will of heaven before? And when he was in the common world, he specialized in repairing meridians. I heard that he's very skilled in medicine. Really? Nantion Aurora and Si Haixiao were both shocked. The person who could heal the will of heaven had to be a mysterious expert, so they immediately eliminated Lin Yi as a suspect. But now that they heard the Shinshin elder's words, it seemed that it really was possible. R655. Chapter 41-44. Speaking of which, Lin Yi and the will of heaven seem to have only gotten together recently. The timing is just right. Si Haixiao nodded. Then it must be Lin Yi without a doubt. Damn it, why is it this kid again? He's not very strong, but he can ruin our plans time and time again. He's simply taking advantage of us. Nantion Aurora said angrily. If it wasn't for Lin Yi, then there wouldn't be Tianxing. Without Tianxing, he would have become the vice island master of Middle Island that everyone respected. He wouldn't be lying on the bed with a body full of injuries, becoming a joke to the outside world. Dean Nantion, we can't tolerate this. We can't spoil Lin E anymore. If he continues to be so unscrupulous, we must find a chance to deal with him. Patriarch Xianxian suggested with a gloomy face. That's right. This kid is too arrogant. Si Haishao nodded in agreement. The last time he was beaten like a dog at the North Island's Hong Chamber of Commerce, it was actually related to Lin E. He had always held a grudge against him. Oomph. Do you think I don't want to kill that kid? However, we can't do it here openly. The will of heaven is obviously protecting him. If we deal with him like this, it's equivalent to offending that lunatic, the will of heaven. Nantion Aurora said with a frown. The battle at Middle Pinnacle Mountain and the will of heaven had already left a psychological shadow in his heart. He was only at the perfected nascent soul stage, but it made him, a mysterious ascension early stage expert, feel an insurmountable gap in strength. This kind of gap could not be seen, but he was already in despair. Nantion Aurora was undoubtedly a proud person, but even so, he had completely lost the courage to fight with the will of heaven again. In this lifetime, he probably would not be able to win against the will of heaven again. Hearing this, Si Haishao and Patriarch Xianxian fell silent. Even Nantion Aurora was afraid of the will of heaven. Their strength was far inferior. They dared not provoke him. Why don't we do it after Lin E returns to the North Island? No matter how powerful the will of heaven is, he can't possibly follow him to the North Island, right? Patriarch Xianxian suddenly suggested. Si Haishao shook his head and said, That's even worse. That guy also has a backer in the North Island. Shanghai Tianhua, the master of Sky-Reaching Pavilion, is protecting him. Shanghuan Tianhua, just a mere Soaring Sky Pavilion's pavilion master. What's there to be afraid of? Nantion Aurora said disdainfully. With the strength of the will of heaven, there was no doubt that he was already at the top of Nakajima. It was understandable that he was not a match for him, but Nakajima was Nakajima after all. The strength of a top master was not something that a mere Kitajima could compare to. Old friend Nantion, you are gravely mistaken. Si Haishao shook his head. Ah, what do you mean? Nantion Aurora was stunned. Don't think that Shanghai Tianhua is just the pavilion master of Sky-Reaching Pavilion in the North Island. But accurate intelligence shows that as early as 20 years ago, he was already a great perfection, profound ascension master. If we really forced him to make a move, killing us would be a piece of cake, Si Haishao said with a wry smile. What? A mere Soaring Sky Pavilion's pavilion master in the North Island is actually almost as strong as the island master? Nantion Aurora was instantly shocked. Patriarch Xianxian, who was beside him, was also extremely shocked. Old friend Nantion, don't underestimate the strength of those big shots outside of Nakajima. Many of them are unwilling to come to Nakajima. Otherwise, the power structure in Nakajima might not be like this now. Si Haishao reminded him, Shanghai Tianhua rarely makes a move in person. Very few people know of his strength, let alone mention it. If I hadn't been in charge of the intelligence department of the Chamber of Commerce in the North Island recently, I wouldn't have known about these things. This time, Nantion Aurora and Patriarch Xianxian did not know what to say. The terrifying strength of a great perfection, profound ascension master. Even compared to a monster like the Will of Heaven, he was probably stronger and not weaker. Making a move on Lin E in his territory was like touching a tiger's, but then this we can't touch Nakajima. We can't touch Nakajima either, so we really can't touch that kid Lenny? Patriarch Xianxian said with a face full of unwillingness. Actually, it's not that there's no way. Si Haishao's eyes suddenly lit up. We can totally make a move on his way back to Nakajima. He's a disciple of the 3 major pavilions of Nakajima. Don't think that he'll never go back just because he's in Nakajima now. Yes, if Lenny keeps staying in Nakajima and doesn't go back, he'll be betraying the 3 major pavilions of Nakajima. There'll be no place for him on Heaven's Stage Island anymore. Even Shanghai Tianhua can forget about protecting him, so he'll have to go back sooner or later, and the road is the best opportunity. Shopkeeper C, this idea is brilliant. Nantian Aurora and Patriarch Xianxun both agreed. In that case, let's start preparing for this matter as soon as possible. There's only one chance, so we must be well prepared to ensure that nothing goes wrong. Si Haishao nodded, then immediately said, "By the way, old friend Nantian, now that you're awake, it's time to meet the owner of our Central Chamber of Commerce. What do you think? Okay, this time your Central Chamber of Commerce invested so much for me, but in the end, you messed it up. To tell you the truth, I'm actually perturbed, and I've long wanted to go and offer a humble apology," Nantian Aurora said with some fear and trepidation. The Central Chamber of Commerce was mysterious and unfathomable. The more he interacted with it, the more apprehensive he was of its power. Now that things had messed up, and he was even heavily injured, once he was judged to have lost his value, Nantian Aurora was very worried that the other party would do something detrimental to him. This was also human nature. Hey, old friend Nantian, you're thinking too much. Even horses stumble. No matter how well prepared you are, there'll always be accidents. Our owner has already expressed his stance on this matter, and we don't blame you. Otherwise, I wouldn't have given you so many healing panaceas to treat your injuries. Si Haishao comforted him with a smile. That's good, that's good. Nantian Aurora heaved a sigh of relief. The next day, Si Haishao brought Nantian Aurora to the Central Chamber of Commerce's Nakajima headquarters. As Nantian Aurora's follower, Patriarch Xianxun was also brought along. When he arrived at the Central Chamber of Commerce, Nantian Aurora was quickly received by Si Haishao's so-called owner. It was the mysterious black-robed man who took him in on Nakajima back then. This person was very strong. Nantian Aurora instantly shuddered. Although he couldn't even see what the other party looked like, Nantian Aurora could be 100% sure that the other party's strength was definitely far above his own just from the aura emanating from the other party's body. The other party was at least an expert above the profound ascension middle stage. He felt that this person's strength was even vaguely similar to the island master of Nakajima. When this thought popped up, Nantian Aurora was immediately shocked. Looking at the entire Nakajima, there weren't many profound ascension experts to begin with, and those above the profound ascension middle stage were even rarer. Nantian Aurora had also stayed in the Cultivator Academy for so many years, so he basically knew all the important figures there. However, he had no impression of the person in front of him at all. Seeing Si Haishao repeatedly signaling him with his eyes to agree, he knew that if he continued to refuse, he would lose face. If he really angered this mysterious person, not only would the Central Chamber of Commerce no longer be allies in the future, but they would also become enemies. That would be big trouble. Then, I will respectfully accept. Nantian Aurora immediately nodded in agreement. He thought to himself that he would only be joining in private anyway, and the outside world did not know of his relationship with the Central Chamber of Commerce. He could also go back on his word and refuse to admit it. Very good. In that case, eat this pill. In the future, you will be one of us, said the mysterious man as he placed a medicinal pill before Nantian Aurora. He even needed to take medicine. Nantian Aurora's eyelids twitched. This was completely different from what he had expected. Even if he hadn't eaten pork, he would have seen pigs run. The pill in front of him was definitely poison. Once he consumed it, he would never be able to escape the control of this mysterious person in the future. For a moment, Southern Polar Light couldn't help but want to flick his sleeves and leave. At the end of the day, he and the Central Chamber of Commerce were only using each other. He had never thought of becoming a puppet controlled by the Central Chamber of Commerce. However, the powerful aura of the mysterious person in front of him was so oppressive that he didn't dare to move at all. Nantian Aurora even suspected that if he dared to refuse, he probably wouldn't be able to walk out of here today. He didn't dare to leave, and he didn't want to agree. Instantly, Nantian Aurora was in a dilemma. In an instant, sweat poured down his forehead like rain, and his entire back was completely drenched. What? You're not willing? The mysterious person's voice had an additional trace of unfriendliness. He didn't release an earth-shattering aura, but made Nantion Aurora a mysterious ascension early-stage expert, so scared that he couldn't breathe. Old friend Nantion, hurry up and eat it. We definitely won't harm you. Seeing this, Si Hai Xiao, who was at the side, hurriedly chimed in. There will only be returns if you put in the effort. If you want to obtain higher power and status, you naturally have to show your sincerity. Otherwise, how could the Central Chamber of Commerce invest so much in you? Don't you think so? One was coercion, and the other was enticement. Nantion Aurora had no choice but to agree. Moreover, it was indeed as Si Hai Xiao had said. During this period of time, he had already witnessed the enormous power of the Central Chamber of Commerce. He was deeply aware of how terrifying and astonishing it was. If he could obtain its full support, regardless of the cost, just the thought of that scene made him excited and fascinated. In the end, Nantion Aurora gritted his teeth, picked up the pill on the table, and ate it. He had no choice. If he didn't eat it, he wouldn't be able to escape unscathed today. Good. From now on, you're one of us. Don't worry, the Central Chamber of Commerce will never mistreat one of us. The mysterious person smiled in satisfaction. What should this subordinate do next? Senior, please tell me. Nantion Aurora respectfully asked. Nantion Aurora was a sensible person. Since he had already taken the pill, he knew that it was already impossible for him to go back on his word. Instead, he might as well lower his stance and serve this mysterious person well. This way, he would be able to obtain even greater benefits in the future. Since you failed in the competition for the position of Deputy Island Head of Middle Island this time, find another opportunity next time. What you need to do now is to lay low in the Cultivator Academy, gain a firm foothold, and think of a way to fight for the position of Deputy Dean. As for other matters, we'll decide on them after that. The mysterious person instructed. Yes, I'll obey Senior's instructions. Nantion Aurora immediately accepted the order. Since he was unable to compete for the position of Deputy Island Head of Middle Island in the short term, it was not a bad idea to first obtain the position of Deputy Dean of the Cultivator Academy. He believed that with the Central Chamber of Commerce as his backing, this step would definitely be a piece of cake. Coming out of the mysterious person's room, Nantion Aurora felt as if he had just gone through a sauna. His entire body was drenched in cold sweat. He turned his head and looked at the tightly shut door, filled with lingering fear. Luckily, he was sensible enough just now. If he had said anything wrong, he might already be a corpse by now. Since Nantion Aurora's side had been settled, Patriarch Black Earth, who was guarding outside the door, naturally joined the Central Chamber of Commerce. However, he was different from a core figure like Nantion Aurora, who was highly valued. Even if he had taken the pill, he could only be considered an outer member. In the future, he would still be Nantion Aurora's subordinate. In order to celebrate the two of them joining the Central Chamber of Commerce, Si Hai Xiao specially got someone to prepare a private room. A table of good dishes was laid out, and the three of them drank and chatted merrily. Chapter 41-46. Shopkeeper C, you're the shopkeeper of the North Island branch, and you are also in charge of the intelligence department. You must be very familiar with the situation on the North Island. I want to ask about someone. Do you have any impression of him? Patriarch Xianxun asked as he poured wine for the two of them. Oh, we are family. Xianxun, just ask. I will tell you everything I know, Si Hai Xiao promised. I have a disciple in the secular world. This time, he was also teleported to Heaven Stage Island with me, but he didn't come to Middle Island. So, I want to ask you if he was teleported to the North Island. His name is Kong Ming Ming, Patriarch Xianxun probed. Kong Ming Ming? So, he is your disciple, Xianxun. What a coincidence. To tell you the truth, this kid was recruited by me a while ago. Now, he is also an outer member of our center. If I had known about this, I would have taken good care of him. Si Hai Xiao promised with a smile. Ah, he is really on the North Island. That's great. Thank you for your care, Shopkeeper C. Come, let me propose a toast to you on behalf of my disciple. Patriarch Xianxian was overjoyed and quickly toasted Si Hai Xiao. Well said, well said. Old friend Nantian, come with me. Seeing how much the boss values you today, you will definitely have a meteoric rise in the future. At that time, don't forget about your old friend. Si Hai Xiao turned his head and said with a smile. Same to you. We are in the same boat. No one can forget the other. Nantian Aurora laughed, and the three of them immediately drank their wine. Middle Island, Snow Sword Faction. More than half a month had passed since the auction in Middle Island. The entire faction was focused on hunting Wu Fuling Yi, but there was still no news of him. This person seemed to have evaporated into thin air. After so many days, not a single person had seen him, let alone caught him. Although the higher-ups of the Snow Sword faction were angry, they could only give up for the time being. As for Wei Shinjin, now he had barely recovered enough to get out of bed and move, but the meridians in his body could not be healed. Naturally, he did not have the strength of the early stage of Goldcore. Now he was almost no different from an ordinary person. No matter how much attention he had received in the past as a core disciple, he had now become an ordinary person without any strength. The Snow Sword School could no longer focus on him. Since he could not heal his injuries, wasting more medicinal ingredients would be pointless. He had already been completely abandoned by the higher-ups of the school. In the room, there was a man and two women with messy clothes. They were none other than Wei Shinjin, Sidu Qian, and their maid, Little Chihuahua. Wei Shinjin couldn't accept such a cruel reality. He didn't dare to go out and could only numb himself by having fun day and night. Otherwise, he would definitely be tortured to the point of insanity by the gloating gazes of his fellow disciples. However, even on the bed, because of his injuries, it was very difficult for him to find his masculinity. He was no longer the same as before. Why is it so short this time? He hasn't had enough yet. Useless. Situ Qian got up from the bed in disgust and said unhappily. The maidservant, Little Chihuahua, also had a bitter expression on her face. Back then, when she had just gotten married, Little Chihuahua had a bitter expression on her face. When Wei Shinjin was a vigorous dragon and fierce tiger, he was more than enough to serve the two of them. But now, he couldn't even satisfy Sidu Qian. It was just the beginning, and it was already impossible for her, the little maid, to satisfy him. These days, she was simply suffocated. Being looked at by the two women with such disgust, Wei Shinjin couldn't help but feel depressed. His meridians were damaged, which naturally affected him in this aspect. Moreover, he had not yet recovered, and his body was not even as good as an ordinary person. Situ Qian and Little Chihuahua were very demanding in this aspect. He simply couldn't do anything about it. Looking at Wei Shinjin's cowardly appearance, the disgust in Situ Qian's eyes became even more intense. When Wei Shinjin was injured, she didn't think too much about it. Not only was she busy taking care of him every day, but she was also responsible for comforting him. She could be considered to be doing her best. But now, as time passed, she began to gradually become impatient. She was originally a slut. She had admired Wei Shinjin's strength, so she tried every means possible to be with him. But now, Wei Shinjin had been abandoned by the sex higher-ups and had become a complete cripple. There was no hope of him recovering. The little bit of admiration in Situ Qian's heart had long disappeared, replaced by a stronger and stronger disgust. Forget it, I'm going to cultivate. Situ Qian couldn't be bothered with this trash anymore. She gave Little Chihuahua a look, and the master and maid put on their clothes. Immediately, they swayed their waists and pushed the door open. Cultivate. Wei Shinjin couldn't help but be stunned. In his impression, Situ Qian had never been such a motivated person. It was rare for her to take the initiative to cultivate. Today, the sun rose from the west. The room suddenly became empty, leaving Wei Shinjin alone and sad. He stared at the yellow autumn scenery outside the window, lost in thought. The will of heaven had recovered his strength and became the deputy island owner of Middle Island. The business in Tiandan Pavilion had also been on the right track. Tian-chan and Sydney both had a foothold. For Lin Yi, the matters in Middle Island were basically almost settled. Counting the days, it had been a month. This unexpected trip to Middle Island should be over. Otherwise, if it continued to drag on here, Lin Yi couldn't guarantee what would happen in North Island. However, before leaving, Lin Yi began to refine elixirs with all his strength. He wanted to reserve more elixirs for Tian Pavilion. Although Tian-chan's strength had skyrocketed and her efficiency in refining elixirs had greatly improved, it seemed that she could support the daily turnover of Tian Pavilion. However, the business of Tian Pavilion was still growing. If it continued to develop like this, it wouldn't take long for it to exceed the ability of Tian-chan. Lin Yi had to prepare early. Of course, he could continue to refine elixirs after he went back. At that time, he could ask Hong Zhong to help him regularly. However, in addition to the business of Tian Pavilion, what Lin Yi couldn't let go of the most was Tian-chan and Sydney. Although the strength of the two women had now reached the early stage of gold core, and they had the protection of powerful figures such as the Will of Heaven, there was no need to worry too much about their safety. However, Lin Yi was still reluctant to separate from the two women. It was not easy for them to reunite in this Middle Island. Now, they had to separate again. No matter who it was, they would be reluctant, especially when the two women were beautiful confidantes. After all, Lin Yi was not an eminent monk who had no worldly desires. It would be a lie to say that he was not moved at all to stay with such two stunning beauties every day. Chapter 41-47. During this period of time, Lin Yi's heart had been moved many times, and Tian-chan and Sydney had long since prepared to marry him. But the last moment, Lin Yi would always stop in time. It wasn't that he had any psychological barriers, and it wasn't because he had any problems in that area that he couldn't talk about. The reason why he was able to control himself was because of that one time when he was drunk, the ghost suddenly appeared and said something. The creation battle art is a traditional morality heart technique. At least before the mysterious ascension stage, you must not touch women. Otherwise, it will cause the flow of true chi in your meridians to reverse. Every time you do it, it will accelerate the flow of true chi in your meridians. When you do it too many times, you will definitely die from the reverse flow of true chi in your meridians. It's that scary? Lin Yi was shocked. Think about it. If you cultivate the mental cultivation method backwards, what will happen to you? I'm not trying to scare you. There's a precedent of this on Sky-class Island before. The ghost laughed. All right. Only then did Lin Yi suppress the fire in his heart. He thought that the art of dragon mastery was a universal practitioner's art, and this heaven's fortune battle art that he'd modified. He probably wouldn't die even if he practiced it backwards, right? Of course, this was just a thought. Lin Yi wasn't that bored to the point where he'd go against the flow. After all, this wasn't a joke. If he guessed wrongly, the consequences would be that he'd go mad, or he'd die on the spot. It was because of this episode that Lin Yi was able to control himself and didn't eat the two girls, leaving it for the future. Other than Tian-chan and Sydney, Lin Yi had another unfulfilled wish, and that was the cheap master that he had never met, the pill god Zhang Liju. Lin Yi thought that he would be able to meet Zhang Liju sooner or later, but he didn't expect that this cheap master of his never showed up at all. He didn't even know where Zhang Liju went, let alone meet him. In this period of time, Lin Yi had asked Hou Guanqi and Kai Zhongyang, his two disciples, to try and contact Zhang Liju, but there was no reply. Left without a choice, Lin Yi could only start preparing to return to the North Island. As for meeting Zhang Liju, that would have to wait for another day. While preparing to deal with the aftermath before leaving, Lin Yi couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Recalling the original intention of this trip, he suddenly felt a sense of impermanence. Originally, he was just on a Hutsai mountain to look for the life mushroom, but he didn't expect to be injured by the Golden Core Middle Phase Master and then brought to Middle Island by Sidu Qian. After that, a series of unexpected events happened. The saying that fate played tricks on people was indeed true. Thinking about Situ Qian, Lin Yi couldn't help but hesitate. This woman was the source of Sydney's misery for half a year. Just like Wei Shenjin, he had long since made up his mind to get rid of her. However, now that he had crippled Wei Shenjin, this woman was the only one left. She was no longer a threat to Sydney. After all, she had the protection of the great god, the will of heaven. Even if Sydney's identity was exposed, he believed that the Snow Sword faction wouldn't dare do anything to Sydney. However, leaving this woman alive was still a hidden danger. He was now wondering if he could get rid of this danger completely before he left. Although there was a lot of risk in killing Situ Qian, it was the same as dealing with Wei Shenjin. He could use Wufu Ling Yi's identity as a scapegoat. This way, it wouldn't affect Tiandan Pavilion. Of course, no matter what, the Snow Sword faction was one of the few big factions on Middle Island. Even if Lin Yi was an early-stage gold core expert, and even had the terrifying potential to become the strongest gold core expert, it was still too arrogant for him to kill Situ Qian. Especially during this period of time, the Snow Sword faction was still searching for Wufu Ling Yi. If he wanted to make a move, he would have to find an excellent opportunity. While Lin Yi was assessing the risk, the whereabouts of Situ Qian, who was his target, became more and more strange in the past few days. It even aroused the suspicion of Wei Shenjin. Before this, Situ Qian and her maid, little Qiuhua, would often stay in the room to accompany him. However, in the past few days, the master and maid stayed in the room less and less. They never said anything when they went out. However, every time they came back, Wei Shenjin would find that the two of them had a rosy complexion and were in high spirits. They were like fresh flowers that had been moisturized. As for their sexual affairs, they never mentioned it again after the last time. This made Wei Shenjin very surprised. Whether it was Situ Qian or little Qiuhua, they were both women with extremely strong sexual needs. A few days ago, they had been complaining about this matter, but now, they simply did not mention it at all. No matter how he thought about it, he felt that there must be something fishy about it. Wei Shenjin could not help but ask about their whereabouts several times. However, the answer he got from Situ Qian was that they had gone to cultivate. This answer was something that Wei Shenjin did not believe at all. According to Situ Qian's usual temperament, it was already the sun rising from the west if she occasionally took the initiative to cultivate. It was simply impossible for her to cultivate for several days in a row. However, Situ Qian did not want to talk about it. It was futile for Wei Shenjin to ask any more questions. He could only continue to suppress his doubts in the bottom of his heart. On this day, just like the previous few days, Situ Qian and her maid little Qiuhua went out early, leaving Wei Shenjin to rest alone in his room. It was not until late at night that the sound of their footsteps could be heard from outside the door. Miss, Senior Brother Ma, is really brave today. The Central Chamber of Commerce's medicine is really overbearing. He has been serving us sisters for several hours in a row, but he is still so brave. This was the voice of the maid, little Qiuhua. Her voice was obviously a bit louder than usual. Moreover, she sounded a bit drunk. It seemed like she had drunk a lot of alcohol. Yes, today was really too exciting. That way Shenjin is getting worse and worse. He shouldn't have killed all those male pets. It's such a pity to keep a few of them alive. Now, we can only look for Senior Brother Ma to satisfy our cravings. Situ Qian said with a drunken smile. That's true. Senior Brother Ma is really brave, and we are also very satisfied with him. However, his appearance is too ordinary. It's a bit disgusting to look at him from the front. He is not as pleasing to the eyes as those male pets of ours. Little Qiuhua also said regretfully. Hearing the words that came from outside the door, Wei Shenjin was so angry that his eyes almost popped out of his eye sockets. He was so angry that he could not wait to take out his sword and cut this bitch in half. He had long suspected that there was something going on between the two women. Previously, he thought that the two women were just comforting each other. Although it was a bit embarrassing, his body was weak, so he could only turn a blind eye to it. However, he did not expect that the two women had actually gone to find a wild man and made him wear a big green hat. are 11:52. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.